Groundhog Day is a 1993 film directed by Harold Ramis. The film, starring Bill Murray and Andie MacDowell, is told from the perspective of Murray's character, TV weatherman Phil Connors, a cynical man assigned with the task of covering Groundhog Day festivities in Puxatawney, Pennsylvania, which he hates as he believes it to be a hick town. Over time, Phil realizes he's trapped in a time loop, forced to relive the same days over and over again. Snowed in, with no way to escape the town that he hates, Phil believes himself to be cursed. He has no idea how to make it to tomorrow. The film was a modest success at the time, but its impact wouldn't be apparent for years. Not only did it alter the path of Bill Murray's career, the use of the time loop as a storytelling device became more and more popular, being used to explore different ideas and themes in the decades since its release. Groundhog Day is a 1993 comedy film directed by Harold Ramis. Wait, shit, I said that already. No problem, I'll just edit it out. Just like how I edit out when I'm talking to myself. Like I'm doing now. It's still weird I lost my place at the top, though. I don't normally start losing it until page 2 or 3. That's when I really start to go crazy. I should probably make my intro shorter. Anyway, where was I? Modest success, time loop as a storytelling device being used to explore different... Right, okay, here we go. Groundhog Day is a 1993 comedy film directed by Harold Ramis, who co-wrote the screenplay with... Oh my god, I'm stuck in a time loop. How did this happen? Why did this happen? Jesus Christ. Alright, let's look at some time loop stories. How do people usually break out of time loops? Solve the mystery of the universe. That's an easy one. The mystery of the universe is love. Oh, that's a bummer. Okay, how else have people broken out of time loops? Figuring out quantum physics? I'm too stupid for that. What else? Turning Bill Murray into a good person. Yeah, how hard could that be? Let's just look him up real quick. This allegation section on Wikipedia is pretty long. Jesus Christ, how long is this allegation section? Alright, Bill Murray isn't the answer here. Let's stick with what I know. Podcasts and video games. What are some video games that deal with time loops? Maybe they have the answer. There's The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, where the loop ends if we figure out how to destroy the moon. Yeah, I don't think the network's going to like that. What else is there? There's Outer Wilds, which is inspired by Majora's Mask, but I already talked about that game 2 episodes ago. Oh, there's Deathloop, but that was developed by a French studio, and the French don't have the answer to anything. Shit. Alright. There's The Forgotten City, which is set in a city where everyone is put to death if even a single person commits a sin, and you have to figure out what a sin is defined as. Okay, come on, what else is there? There's Returnal, but I just downloaded that, and I don't want the story spoiled for me. What else do we have? There's Steins Gate, but I wouldn't even know where to begin with that. There's 12 Minutes, where... Actually, what is the deal with 12 Minutes? Yeah, pass. Look, I don't care how many times you loop me. I'm not going to play 12 Minutes. Okay, maybe it isn't about video games. Maybe it's the intro itself. Maybe the issue is that my intros are too long. If I could just get through my intro before the loop ends, I can break out of it, and I can actually start the show. Yeah, let's try that. Let's try that. Okay, so Groundhog Day is a... Fuck! Start over. Groundhog Day is a 1993 movie where Bill Murray gets stuck in a time loop. It was a movie that destroyed Bill Murray's years-long working relationship with Harold Ramis, but was ultimately a success that propelled his career and also popularized the use of time loops as a plot device in the years since its release. One notable example of a time loop film is the 1998 German thriller Run Lola Run, which would go on to serve as the inspiration for this episode's game, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Like Groundhog Day, Majora's Mask's impact on their media became apparent in the years after its release. Time loops have become much more common in video games, with Outer Wilds, Returnal, Deathloop, The Forgotten City, and Loop Hero all coming out in the past 5 years alone. Wait, no, I'm done. Oh my god. I didn't restart. I guess I just need to learn a lesson about making my intros too long. Yeah, that's the way I'll justify making my intro about time loops. Like Shakespeare once said, brevity is the soul of wit. which many people don't know is ironic in the context of Hamlet because the character that says it, Polonius, speaks far too much and thinks he's wittier than he actually is. Sorry. What I just learned, get to the point. Let's just start the show. Thank God that's over. Hope nothing about the show permanently changed as a result of that time loop. Anyway, I'm Keifer, and this is Select and Start. Whoa, look at that. We have a new theme song now. It's composed by musician Mike Petrie, and you can check out his work in the description of this episode. I'm really excited about this new theme song. Mike's a great musician. Thank you so much for making it. Now let's get into this episode and talk about the person sitting right here with me. Hello, and welcome to Select and Start, the podcast about meaningful and memorable video games. I'm your host, Keifer, and every episode I bring on a guest to talk about a video game that made an impact on their life. I'm very excited about today's guest. He is a writer, who worked on Harley Quinn. It's my buddy Jameisen Borak. Jameisen, how are you today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. A little stuttery today, as you can tell.
No worries.
Yeah, no, it was just my birthday a couple weeks ago, and a lot of great stuff's been happening. New Carly Rae Jepsen album, new Blur album, Barbenheimer weekend. So it's an embarrassment of riches. How have you been?
As someone whose birthday was also just a couple weeks ago, I feel similar.
Oh, we're both cancers?
Yes, yeah.
Hell yeah.
Signs.
Well, happy birthday.
Thank you. Same to you.
Awesome. So we have more than one thing in common, which is a favorite video game. That's good to know. We'll talk about that game in a bit here. But before we talk about anything video games, for the people who don't have the pleasure of knowing you, what do you do and what do you like?
So I'm a writer. I've worked mostly in TV. I worked on Harley Quinn on Max that I'm not plugging because there's a writer strike right now.
Solidarity.
I love video games. I'm a huge Nintendo fan. I was raised pretty heavily with Nintendo when I was younger, and I have a brother who's 8 years older. I've never known life without a Nintendo system. So pretty young, it became a big part of my life, and definitely I think defined a lot of things that I like and my taste in general.
Awesome. I mean, another thing we have in common is, coming from a Nintendo household with a brother who's 8 years older than us. I have a brother who's 8 years older, another brother who's 9 years older. Very much my early video game taste was defined by them. Let's talk about those video games that you grew up with a little bit. As you know, no community likes to gatekeep more than the gamers, so we have to check your gaming credentials here at the top. Let's talk about that gaming history. You said your brother got you into it. What have you played throughout the years? What has stood out to you? What's your portrait of a gamer, Jameisen?
For sure, yeah. So the first system we owned was a Super Nintendo. We had an NES before that, but the Super Nintendo was really what I remember when I was a kid. And I feel like some of my earliest memories are just playing Donkey Kong Country 2 with my brother all the time. Playing that. Mario RPG was another one that made a big impact on me. And I think I've always, we'll get into it with the main game or whatnot, but I think I've always been kind of drawn to the element that these Nintendo games have such whimsy to them, but there's also this weird eeriness and sadness and melancholy that does permeate through Mario RPG or even Donkey Kong Country 2 with its soundtrack and whatnot. Grew up with that, and then obviously we moved on to the 64. And I've had every Nintendo console except I think the Wii U was the one generation that I skipped. I think as it's been discussed in your podcast before, I think a lot of us kind of fall out of gaming a little bit in college.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of to the side for me. I feel like that, the 3DS, I had a 3DS, but I missed out a little bit on some of those. But I've always loved games, and I feel like you kind of fall out of it when you're in college, and then I got back into it after college and realized just what a great stress reliever it is. I feel like I calmed so much more getting back into games. And also another big thing for me is as a writer, you're very interested in developing your voice and whatnot, and having your unique tastes and things that make that up. And I feel like I went to film school, I went to Emerson in Boston, and everyone's tastes then start to get funneled a little more similarly.
Yeah.
And then like I feel like my voice is more distinctive in the beginning, and so I spent a lot of time afterwards, after college, trying to get back into like, oh, what's specifically my voice and what like defines me and makes me unique. And a big thing I realized was like my love of like Nintendo in particular, and just Nintendo's influences and stuff. And I spent some time trying to like get back in touch with all of that, and I feel like it made me a better writer by embracing a lot of those elements.
That's great to hear. A very material impact that gaming has made on your life and your career. We'll talk about that in a moment here. I do want to touch on the fact that you said that you've grown up with mainly Nintendo consoles throughout the year. What is your favorite console overall?
My favorite console overall, I mean, definitely the one I'm most nostalgic for and has, I think, my favorite stuff is the Super Nintendo. I think like that,
Mhm.
like is just so aesthetically pleasing, having the height before switching to 3D graphics. There's
Yeah.
such detail, and just like the Donkey Kong Country 2 score in particular, I'm just constantly wowed by that they like fit all that onto the chip is like unbelievable.
Yeah.
That it's like so beautiful. It's maximalizing so much with the minimalness that they have to work with. But I also have a real soft spot for the GameCube. I think that's
Yeah.
another like just perfectly designed looking system, and that was like really the era of like, oh, this was mine. Like the 64 and Super Nintendo were my brothers, but the GameCube was my console.
Yeah.
But I do think the best console of all time is it's the Switch. The Switch, like, I feel like takes everything Nintendo does well and has like fine-tuned and perfected things that in a way that like really amazed me and got me so excited about gaming again.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have that relationship with the Switch where people who either had fallen off of gaming for a while, use it to get back into it because of how approachable it is, or people who, and speaking of that approachability, a lot of people who just haven't played video games at all approach it through the Switch because it's form factor Nintendo. There's a lot of variety of games on there. It has a lot of ports onto there too. So people who want to get through some gaming history, even though like we know my opinions on like the actual Nintendo Switch Online service, but it is a very good vector for a lot of people just getting into games and want to play something simple or just like learn the language of games. I think that Nintendo, for a lot of their troubles with accessibility in terms of controls, as opposed to like the rest of the industry, which seems to have like adopted these standards a lot more quickly, Nintendo isn't very good at the actual like, hey, here's some alternate ways of play, but they are very good at like teaching people the basics of a genre or the appeal of a genre. Pikmin is a very good way of people getting into strategy games, or the Fire Emblem games are also a good way of getting into strategy games, or Zelda into action adventure games. Mario RPG is a very good intro to RPG mechanics, as well as like the Mario and Luigi series. So they're very good at like basically be doing like the 100 level courses of like complex systems. So I totally agree with you that like Nintendo and the Switch in particular are very good consoles in that regard too.
Yeah, they're so good at that simplicity of and I think going back to the thing I was saying earlier about writing too, I think that also made a big impact. Is like they maximize everything they like have without
Mhm.
overwhelming you. It's such compact design in all those games, and the way that they like will teach you in a Mario like level, how they'll teach you how to do it initially, and then it'll start to twist it and challenge you with like those mechanics. Is
Yeah.
so impressive. And I also, I mean, I do have I've got some PlayStation consoles as well throughout my
Mhm.
life. I definitely was a big Kingdom Hearts fan. I feel like
Yeah.
that is like very influential in my humor. I feel like that's like everything I like love. Like I love when silly things are taken super serious and when like
Yeah.
serious things are treated silly. And Kingdom Hearts is like the ultimate. I mean, like having like Goofy get mortally wounded at some point and like Donald scream his Goofy's name is just forever burned in me as like such a funny development of my taste and humor.
Yeah, no. I watched Ghost Dog, the Forrest Whitaker movie,
Yeah.
directed by Jim Jarmusch recently, and he lives by this code of the samurai. And there's like one axiom that Whitaker reads, where it's like,
Matters of great concern should be treated lightly. Master Ite commented, matters of small concern should be treated seriously.
This is not happening. It can't be happening. It can't.
They'll pay for this.
and I guess by that metric, Kingdom Hearts is one of the great samurai because they do definitely like live by that. It's a great absurd series, and I'm glad that it takes the sincere route, especially as Disney properties have struggled with taking the sincere route otherwise.
Yeah, it's also it's like the one I mean, it's become such a nightmare how everything wants to be a crossover, and like all this like stuff that I feel like I loved as a kid of mashing my toys up together
Mhm.
is like the standard in so many Hollywood things and whatnot. But like Kingdom Hearts is so pure in it because it
Mhm.
just makes no sense, and it's just such gibberish to mash up these things that like I feel like that's like the missing key element
Yeah,
that a lot of their stuff don't do.
the literal key in this case. Yeah.
Very true.
But yeah, no, very fun series. I really hope I can talk about it in detail soon. But yeah, no, Nintendo is very good talking about that again, about using visual language to tell a story rather than just walls of text or like rather than explain things through narrative, they just convey things through scenery, which is great for the visual medium of video games and the interactive medium of video games, and also saving the player time so they can immerse themselves in the world. But it is just like a really brilliant way of exciting the imagination of the player, like we'll talk about in this game, which is rife with so many implications, but never directly says a lot of stuff. So that's something that, I'm glad you take away as a writer because that's some of my favorite stuff in video games.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I remember there was this quote when I was doing the time period of like trying to research my voice and Nintendo and that stuff, and I remember coming across something. I forget who said it now, but they were discussing Splatoon. But like one
Mhm.
of the developers was talking about the fact that like one of the core things they try to do at Nintendo is that even though it's like bright and colorful, everything, and like people are smiling and whatnot, it's like built upon like a world or an idea of intense sadness, so
Mhm.
that it like kind of seeps out to like the happier elements. And like Splatoon was the example they're discussing, where it's like this is a world that experienced like nuclear holocaust and whatnot, but it's evolved into this vibrant and colorful squid octopus like world. But
Mhm.
that there is this like sadness of a civilization that's died underneath, and it's like that's what gives the world so much depth. Like I love Splatoon. I rarely think about that when I'm playing the game, but I do
Yeah.
think you can feel it. I do think it's like this like subconscious thing underneath that you can feel those elements, and that's what makes I think Nintendo games and worlds feel so rich and meaningful. Is that mashup of that light and dark? I think you can feel in most of their games.
Yeah, there's a fascination with it, but also it's not like a lack of maturity about it because these games are targeted for younger people, but it is sort of like a I'm not going to say totally like a Ghibli film, but that kind of approach where it's like kids can handle this. Like they're able to
For
approach and
sure.
appreciate the dark of reality. And I think there's a way that we can convey that without making them feel miserable. And in the case of Splatoon, it's making nuclear war parallel to the sentiment of like going through an abandoned mall. You know what I mean? Or just like
Hmm.
whatever's going on in Kirby lore.
Yeah, that's such an interesting thing about how they pull off. Yeah, and like when you're a kid, you don't feel all those things, but I do remember the feeling of like listening to like a song like Sticker Brush Symphony in like Donkey Kong Country 2, and being like, why does this make me feel this emotion? Like, why am I
Hmm.
feeling so like wistful even as like a 6-year-old? This intense well of emotion. I mean, the game we're going to talk about today, that's the entire like foundation of why I love this game, and yeah, I just love that.
Yeah, I'm still waiting, and there's lots of great emotional video games that leave an impact on me. But I guess I'm still chasing that like profound feeling that a game rated E for everyone made me feel when I was like 4 or 5 years old when I first played this game that we're talking about. We've talked about games that you grew up playing, games that mean a lot to you throughout your life. What have you been playing lately?
Yeah, so lately, I mean, again, we'll get into this one a little bit more, but a game called Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom definitely was taking up a lot of my time, but I've kind of taken a little break from that at the moment, and I've been doing Final Fantasy 16, which I've been enjoying, and now I'm kind of switching over and doing some Pikmin 4, which I love the Pikmin franchise. I'm so excited that they're doing another one, and that Nintendo's really doing this big push about like wanting to really introduce more people to Pikmin with this game after it kind of falling, I feel like, to the wayside a little bit in the past. So
Yeah,
it's a great year for games.
yeah, they went from having just Pikmin 3 on the Switch to having Pikmin 1 and 2, and now the new one, 4, on there. So an entire franchise represented on the Switch. I wish they could get Wind Waker on there, but hey, yeah, Pikmin 1 and 2 too. Hell yeah.
They're just saving that, I feel like, for when there's like a little bit of a drought. We
Yeah,
have to get it. It's insane it's not on there.
it is. But like, I'm trying not to be bitter about it because other, missed hidden gems of the GameCube era are being represented. So I'm not trying to have sour grapes about it. I'm just trying to understand the logic of not having more Zelda games on there. As if I'm not constantly eating as a Zelda fan, where every other non-Mario, non-Zelda entity is constantly starving. So
I mean, that is the funny thing of like, everything today is a reboot or a sequel or a prequel or something like that. But when it comes to like, yeah, Zelda or Mario, I'm like, yeah, I'll eat, especially Zelda. I'm like, I'll eat all of it. Give me a million sequels. Give me a million new Zelda games. I'll play the old ones constantly. Like, I can never get tired of them. But that is the crazy thing about that. Like, I would play video games in order to like de-stress from work and not think about work as a way to kind of like zone out in this other world. And like now I play certain video games because I'm like, well, this is going to become a TV show at some point. Like I got to play this so I like know about it in case I can get a meeting or something on it.
Right.
And it is funny that there are some games now where I'm like, would I have played this otherwise? I don't know, but I'm like, I got to do this.
No, I mean, like, that's a thing about working on a podcast where I'm making content talking about video games. It's kind of like a fast forward button on some of my backlog where, oh, I haven't played Final Fantasy Tactics. I always wanted to. Well, better play it now so I can talk about it on the podcast. And, it becomes a masterpiece and like you love it and you're excited to talk about it, but you also just can't help but feel a little dirty because you did it for the pursuit of content, to speak frankly about it. But unlike us, we aren't billionaires creating IP and who don't want to pay writers a few dollars, and
Mm-hmm.
is compromising the entire future of the medium and the industry because they're petty assholes. So I think that's the difference between you and me. We're just trying to, live and enjoy this shit, where they just sort of see it as money.
Yeah, it's a monkey's paw in a way to like, I'm sure you feel with the podcast, but it's like, so much of, even like most of my career has been writing on Harley Quinn. I wrote on the first 3 seasons, and it is like funny that like for every day for all those years, my first thought would be like Batman. I had to think about Batman so much. And
Hmm.
I have like such strong opinions on like the Joker and
Hmm.
stuff like this that it's like funny to take this thing that you just enjoyed as a kid and then it just becomes all consuming as your like career or your hobby.
Yeah, but like, I live for that shit. I like doing
Of
this stuff.
course.
I like playing in the sandbox of the stuff that I grew up with and seeing how other people approach and appreciate the stuff that we like. So, this is a transformative creative collaborative project, and then like point is that the writers and the actors and everybody are right to strike. I hope video games also, a new deal is struck with people so they can unionize and organize. Animation as well. Everybody, all of the above. Let the creatives create.
For sure, team WGA.
Yeah, go on. Solidarity. Have to put that in there. Brilliant people who deserve to make a living doing the stuff that they love, living and loving. Now that we've gotten through talking about the existential dread of creation, let's talk about the future.
A perfect segue.
The perfect segue to talk about the future, which isn't scary at all. Is there anything that you're looking forward to playing after Pikmin 4, Final Fantasy 16, and Tears of the Kingdom?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've downloaded some games on my Switch recently. So I grew up not having really played Final Fantasy. Like I remember getting Final Fantasy 7 as like a kid, as like a
Hmm.
birthday present or something. I like wanted to get it because that game looked incredible when you're like a little kid, the big sword and everything. But I was like too young to really play it, and my brother ended up kind of playing it mostly. So I never got to finish Final Fantasy VII as a kid, and that kind of became a big thing for me when the remake came out. Where I was like, oh my god, I can finally like play this. And then I went back and played the original game, and now I'm trying to go through some of the Final Fantasies. So having loved
Nice.
Kingdom Hearts as a kid, so I'm doing 16 right now, and then I just got Final Fantasy 6 on the
Hmm.
Switch, so I got to play that. But I feel like all of the big games I'm excited for already are out right now. I feel like of this year,
Yeah.
like I'll get Spider-Man 2, of course, the million Spider-Man 2 that we have to have in our lifetime.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'll just be playing Tears of the Kingdom forever. Like I would play Breath of the Wild for so long after that game came out. No, like I've done this like pause now from the game, but like there's so much left to do that I'll just keep coming back over and over again.
Yeah, I'm doing cleanup on Tears of the Kingdom now, and I paused last night to look at my playtime, and it said 125 hours, and I said, "Oh, um, I want more."
Yeah, I mean, there's like easily like 200 hours or more of content. I feel like in that game, like I beat it, and I'm like, well, there's still so much left for me to do. There's like sections I haven't even been to. I'm sure.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's how I feel. Like, even though I'm like really like looking every single place for the shrines that I haven't cleaned up yet, or doing the last dozen or so side quests I still have open, I'm just still like, I was there this entire time. Was this in the last game? And now I have to go back and play the last game and see if that was there too. That kind of stuff.
It's like, I mean, Tears of the Kingdom was one of the best, I think, experiences ever. I think it's like probably the best video game,
Yeah.
which I thought Breath of the Wild was before, even though what we'll talk about today is my favorite game.
Yeah.
Like, it is just unbelievable. We're like, I feel like also Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild, and then there's like a handful of other games like Elden Ring, and I think like Last of Us Part 2 are games that like made me think like, I love movies and TV. That's like been my focus point in my life. But I was like, oh, I'm working in an outdated medium. Like video games are just more powerful and impactful. Like the experience of like talking with all my friends about Tears of the Kingdom, and like I have one friend who is a bit more of a cautious person, a cautious gamer, and like they'd been playing the game for like 20 plus hours for like a week or two, and I was like with them when they were playing, and they hadn't jumped into the depths yet. Like they
Yeah.
were just too scared to go in the depths, and I was like, that's wild. Like I did the depths so fast. As soon as I saw one of those things, I was like, I gotta jump in it. And then my friend was like, too scary. I'm putting this off. I would even like ask her if she had been to like gone underground yet, and she was like, yeah, I've been in a bunch of caves. And it was just a delight to know this person has no idea that the map is like even bigger than they can imagine at this point. And not knowing those things beforehand and just slowly uncovering is so exciting that like every one friend I've had talking to about the game, no one has had the same experience, even slightly. Everyone has done something different. Where like I even like uncovered an end game quest accidentally. Like halfway through the game, I just happened upon like something that turned out to be one of the final missions. And I just did the entire thing. And like it was so exciting just happening upon this. And I like until they brought it up in the game, I like thought that I just happened upon this and you could just kind of ignore this if you never like went to this one area.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're talking about Zelda games already. So we may as well just like get into it. We're talking about yet another Zelda game today. This is the fourth time I've had a guest on to talk about a Zelda game. We've talked about A Link to the Past, talked about Breath of the Wild, and I've talked about Wind Waker. Now, this is a series that started in 1986 with The Legend of Zelda on a Nintendo Entertainment System. Over the next several decades, it would have 19 mainline video games released across all of Nintendo's major consoles and handhelds. It's one of the most popular video game franchises of all time, as well as one of the most influential. Looking at it holistically, Jameson, what would you say your relationship is like with Zelda in particular?
Oh, Zelda's like my favorite thing ever. Like that's like the franchise like I hold dearest to me. Like I've just always loved it. That like I have two parallel memories of the first time I played Zelda, and I can't remember which came first, of playing Link's Awakening on the Game Boy or playing Ocarina of Time. Yeah, ever since I played that first one, it just totally captivated me. I think that its version of fantasy is my favorite type of
Mhm.
fantasy. I'll get into it a bit more with Majora's Mask, but like I think it's such an interesting mashup of this like it's from this Japanese company and it's like this Japanese point of view on this like very medieval fantasy tropes and
Yeah.
kind of things like Wax and Wane, where like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom have this bigger Japanese influence within it. Majora's Mask has a lot of like Chinese influence within
Mhm.
it, of its operas and whatnot. But like I think that mix becomes so fascinating, and the gameplay is just always so good. And it's the world that like fascinates me the most. I mean, like I would love to do anything. I mean, like dream is to like write a Zelda thing. Like Zelda's the number one for me. I think its world is so fascinating, and then I think it also the element that like I can have a million Zeldas because they are all so different. Like it feels like a rehash. And even in the case of like Tears of the Kingdom or Majora's Mask, which are direct sequels, they are the perfect sequels because they just almost weaponize everything that you found comfortable in the first game and find new ways to flip them on their head. Literally in some ways in Majora's Mask.
Yeah.
Yeah, Zelda's just it's the greatest. Having it be that there's like these core characters and these like core motifs that reincarnate and reoccur throughout time in different settings is so fascinating. And the fact that like Nintendo's never afraid to change things up, having it suddenly be now it's like pirates. It's like pirate influence and it's the sea. Like they're so good, but it always feels that core bit of Zelda-ness that like I could just talk about Zelda all day, which is why I'm here doing it with you.
No, yeah. Like I love your analysis on this world because like it's interesting how like this is a place that's like creating its own language for a lot of like fantastical ideas. Like the idea of like mer creatures through the Zora aren't an original concept, but like the way that the Zora look with like their designs, and the way that those designs have also changed and evolved throughout the series is so distinctly itself. If you try to describe a Goron to somebody who had, was familiar with like Middle Earth or something like that, it would be very difficult to like explain it, because like they have like human features, but they're also rocks, but they also like look soft. Like it's very hard to describe those things. And then there is stuff that is mappable to things that we understand, like mummies or the animated dead, but they just have different language and different lore for those things, and also just different, again, visual designs just for the Redeads and the Gibdo alone. That it's iterative, but it's all, I don't know, it's great. I love that.
Yeah, they have such a unique point of view. The lore is so fascinating to me of Zelda, and how, yeah, the fact that like, it's not, it's I don't know if this gets me in hot water, but it's not like, it's not seriously thought out between each one of like creating this mass tapestry, and yet it does do that. Like I feel like having the Zora evolve into the Rito, and how all that stuff works. And it's so funny, but it's also just funny to look at like the timeline of Zelda, where it's like all the branching things in order to make everything make sense, and then it just magically comes into Breath of the Wild again. Yeah, and it also captures, again, we'll get into this even more with Majora's Mask, but I think there's also an element of that, like, every Zelda game has this kind of loneliness to it. And like my core thought on Majora's Mask, if I'm skipping ahead, is that like the game is just, it's the best exploration of loneliness. But like the thing I think about a lot is like there's this concept art for, I don't remember if it's for the first Zelda or for A Link to the Past, but it's like Link sitting by a fire and he like looks upset. Because it's like, this is like a terrible life for him to have to live. Like, it's not fun to go on that big adventure. Like it's like lonely and it's terrifying. And there's that depth, I think, that does permeate throughout these games, that it's not just like, Mario's always smiling and enjoying what he's doing, even if his like princess is kidnapped. But like, there's this like weight upon Link's shoulders that is just so fascinating, and makes, I think, the games feel so rich to me.
Yeah, I think that you hit a very good point there. I have my personal feelings about the Zelda timeline, which is I don't I don't think about it really. Like, it was interesting when I was a teenager, but like now I just sort of appreciate it more as an art form of like, we can tell whatever stories we want with this world with just a basic template, and like just call it like reinterpretations of a legend, which is something I love. Like one of the most interesting bits of Star Wars that's happened recently has been those Visions cartoons, where different studios get to animate their own takes on what Star Wars is to them, or like what they want to put into Star Wars. And that is exciting and refreshing, because it's just kind of like, it's not a monolithic thing anymore. It doesn't have to adhere to one tight vision or lore sensibilities anymore. Like, it's great when things can manage to work and fit in within a tapestry like you're talking about. And I'm not begrudging those who want something to fit in the tapestry or something like that. But there is something just much more exciting about the idea of like, let's just do this because it's really exciting to us as creators, and then we can figure out the implications of it later. Let's work backwards to that, which I think is what Zelda has been consistently doing for almost 40 years now.
Yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head. That like the thing that I think why it's fun to get so many Zelda games, and I never get tired of it, is because they're not afraid to experiment. So many of those things are so afraid of like, its lore must be, what canon is, and things have to all come together and make sense. And Zelda doesn't care about that. It's experimental and always changing and evolving. And that's what life is. All those elements, and that's what like stories are, is things evolve and change. And I think that's like a thing that Zelda really gets down, is that it does feel like a story almost being passed upon ages, which is, I think, often how most Zelda games begin, is someone's telling you a story about in the past, the legend.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there are people who are trying to figure out how Tears of the Kingdom is supposed to fit with all this, because it has contradicting information, or like how Ganondorf is like this and like this and like that. And I'm like, I'm trying to, like, I am just strictly engaging with the story as it is, and like think, God, that's badass. That's really cool. I like that. And that's my way of approaching art. I'm not saying that like this is a fruitless endeavor for those who are trying to figure out how to make it fit in the timeline, but I can assure those people that Nintendo isn't thinking about that the same way that you are, and they're just doing stuff that they find really cool and trying to maybe sort it out later, and they'll avoid the question as much as possible until they do have an answer for you.
No, to give you a little top secret thing about writers, retconning is an important part of being a writer, is being able to know how to, you write yourself in a corner, and then you retcon your way out of the thing. And I think often a lot of stuff also, it's like, it's subconscious that like some of that stuff will seep through. If you learn enough about the elements, it'll peer its way through.
Yeah, I just think that people should probably like let go, accept the rule of cool, or just I don't know, like try and take these things a little less seriously in order to appreciate them more. I think that people take seriousness for dedication, and I think that those aren't necessarily compatible ideas, and that you can like really love something, but also just like appreciate it more if you just like get over your personal perception of how it should be, I guess.
For sure.
But yeah, Zelda. Let's talk about the games now. In
All
terms of
right.
what these games like. What are your particular favorites of the Zelda series besides the one that we're talking about today?
I think Tears of the Kingdom does shoot incredibly high for me.
Mhm.
And like, I mean, I love Breath of the Wild, but I think Tears of the Kingdom, it does so much of what I want. And it's like, I mean, I love, I mean, again, this gets into the game we're going to talk about today,
Mhm.
but it's like, I love how the world feels so alive in Majora's Mask. And I think Tears of the Kingdom is the closest to capturing that. I think Wind
Mhm.
Waker does it a little bit, but I think like Tears of the Kingdom, there's so many, like all the stuff in Hatno Village with the mayoral election feels so reminiscent of
Yeah.
Majora's Mask. And I love all those elements. Like I think Tears of the Kingdom is just, I don't know how they possibly top it. It's just like, it's unbelievable what a perfect sequel that is and how it utilizes every element. Other Zeldas, I love Wind Waker. Wind Waker is definitely very huge for me.
Mhm.
I was obsessed with it when it came out, and the visuals are so cool. Being able to like play a cartoon is so exciting, and I wish there were more games that like looked like that. If anything, I think that's the thing I wish they would do with like Zelda again, is like I want some more experimentation with its visuals, and hope that they haven't slid into like a house style of like how things look currently, even though it does look good.
Yeah.
I mean, I love Link's Awakening. I thought the remake was so good. Like that's like a perfect example of experimenting with those visuals. Having those like kind of like toy design look is so perfect. But like, yeah, I mean, there's no Zelda I don't love in some way. Like I think they've all been so interesting to me. And I mean, Ocarina of Time, of course, was also big. But I mean, look, you can't top Majora's Mask. It's just,
Yeah.
it's the best game ever made. It's the best Zelda. It's the best game. And you can't top it.
No, I agree with you 100%. I think we're on the same page with that. Before we talk about Majora's Mask and why we love it so much, tell us about some other games that just mean a lot to you.
Sure, yeah. So I mentioned Mario RPG was a really big one for me as well. And I'm so excited. Oh my God. How could I forget this before? Obviously, that's what I'm most excited for. I'm excited for the remake of Mario RPG. God, I
You
can't
mentioned a
believe I
minute
blanked.
ago that you were hoping that Zelda wouldn't be pigeonholed into one specific style anymore. I expressed that concern a couple episodes ago with Mario because I was worried that like it was going to fall into a standard house style for everything, and that has very much been. I no longer worry about that because the recent direct not only showed how faithful the Mario RPG is to the art style of that SNES game, but also the new side-scrolling Super Mario Wonder game looks like a little different of an art style too. So yeah, sorry for interrupting,
Totally.
but yeah,
Yes.
I mean, yeah.
No. I can't believe I didn't think of this earlier. That's obviously Super Mario Wonder is the one that I'm so excited for. I mean, that like little run animation. That's one of the greatest things I've ever seen. It's incredible looking. Yeah, I can't wait for Mario RPG and for people to discover that like, yeah, like I think that's another one that was a big influence on me storytelling wise, and also my sense of humor. Where like I think it plays into that kind of Kingdom Hearts vein. Where like what I love about Mario RPG is that it's like this more serious and
Mhm.
like sad Mario game. And like, I mean, to give a spoiler for Mario RPG, is that okay to give a Mario RPG spoiler?
It is a game that is older than me, so yes.
Okay, all right. But like, I do think a core thing that I thought I was so obsessed with as a kid is I loved Mallow. Everyone loves Gino. I loved Mallow, the little marshmallow guy,
Mhm.
and I loved him because there is nothing that like activates me more than his like storyline of that he grew up thinking he was a tadpole, even though he looks nothing like a tadpole at all.
Mhm.
And then when he discovers that he's like the prince of this like cloud kingdom, and his like mind is blown that he's not a tadpole, and that's so funny, and it's played so straight. There's no joke about it. It is like this dramatic moment of him learning that he is not a frog to
Mhm.
be, and I love that. I always think about that. And that's the stuff that I love the most, where it's something so absurd, but just treated so seriously.
Yeah. Two things with that real quick. The first thing being, number one, like I'm excited to finally finish playing Mario RPG because I played the first half of it when it was out on the virtual console on the Wii years and years ago, and I just never finished it, even though I liked it quite a lot. So I'm excited to play the remake and eventually talk about it on the show with somebody. And then also, To your point about like the Kingdom Hearts sensation of everything, like one, the composer for Kingdom Hearts does the music for Mario RPG, and also like you talk about,
I didn't even know that. That's incredible.
yeah, it's the same woman, yeah. And then with the Milo thing, that just reminds me of Chrono Trigger with the frog character, who is like, he is a frog. He's also the most badass and cool character, and at no point do you ever stop thinking Frog is the most badass and cool character in the game.
Exactly, yeah. I eat that stuff up. So I'm so excited for Mario RPG, and that game is so good. I mean, I loved Animal Crossing a lot, the GameCube one. I loved that game so much, and I loved Wild World. I was really into. I was not as into New Horizons as other people. I mean, I played it a ton, but like I feel like it was a little less about interacting with your animal friends, and like that's what I loved about those old games so much, was fully investing in this world. And I felt like this game was a bit more about you designing the island. And I'm like, no, I just want to be really good friends with a penguin, because I can design my house in real life. I cannot be best friends with a penguin in real life.
Yeah, I still think New Leaf is the height of the series for me, because I think that like you hit the wall faster with New Horizons than you do with any other Animal Crossing game.
Yeah. Other big ones. I mean, like I said, Donkey Kong Country is huge for me. It's a game that like I can just play endlessly. I think like the tone and vibe of that game is so fascinating, and I'm always so bummed that, like, I know that there's a lot of acclaim for the newer Donkey Kong Country games, and they're definitely fun, and the platforming is like incredible in Tropical Freeze. But I do miss the vibe of the '90s Donkey Kong games. Like I think that's one of those really interesting elements too, of that it's like this British. It's rare as like British developer trying to make something like cool and like hip through this like Japanese icon of Donkey Kong. And like I love the weird energy of like Diddy will just start playing guitar, like that really like '90s vibe of like it's edgy but it's a bunch of like monkeys. Is so appealing to me, and I wish it could look like that. I think that's like that's the bummer. I think a little bit about games today sometimes, is that like I think that there's a magic to the older styles in a bit, that like because everything is so detailed now, that it's like it leaves less to the imagination. And that's something that like you really get in particular with like Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask, where it's like it's that like polygon look allows it to have this like liminal space feeling vibe to it that I really miss in a world where everything today is so detailed, or like, you know, it can be such those bright colors, that I kind of miss that kind of grungy Donkey Kong earlier feeling.
No, I agree with that. I think that there is a sort of lost art of implication now, that there is such a level of polish that you can make out what everything is, and it leaves less to the imagination. But that also may just be nostalgia talking. I'm not like denigrating whatever like people are doing to make their games look incredible and detailed. I love that. But there is just something like, when you're making something scary specifically, I guess like it's the rule of Jaws, where what isn't there is like what's the imagination, and that's going to be way scarier than like whatever it ends up being.
Yeah, like I mean, I love new games. I think like some of them are so gorgeous how they look, but yeah, it leaves a lot to the imagination, and that's always going to be the best. When I can imagine, like, you know, replaying some of these older games, like sometimes it's funny to be like, oh, I thought it was so much bigger in, you know, in my head, because it is those like small spaces. Like, you know, when I played Zelda as a kid, those dungeons were massive, and now as an adult, I'm like, well, yeah, I can see all the construction of how it works, or like a Mario 64 level, you know, seemed massive because of just how limited things could be sometimes.
Yeah, and like the way that Mario 64 is able to sort of redefine your relationship with that space by putting stars in different areas of the map, which will, number one, make it seem bigger, but also make you appreciate that the work that they put in making that level what it is greater. So yeah, I totally get that. And I believe me, I have a lot of notes on Zelda and economy and how it makes things seem massive.
Yeah, Mario's also huge. I love other Mario games. I do love Mario Sunshine. I feel like maybe that's my hot take, is that I like Mario Sunshine, I think, more than most. I think that's like such a fun world and vibe. And it's like, you know, it's the only game you can play where like Mario goes to jail and like
As he should.
is a yeah. But and that, like, you know, the cops are being bad to him. Like I love that. It's such an odd vibe, and the odder it is, the more I'm into it for sure. I also love the Mega Man Battle Network games; those were huge for me.
Yes. Fuck yes. Finally. Somebody who says,
Yes.
well, yeah. Sorry,
Oh,
continue.
they're the best. Oh,
Yeah.
they're so good. I have that on the Switch that I got to play more of, the new collection. I would kill for a new one of those to
Mhm.
get made. I mean, that's the height of cool for me still. Like, it screams that I grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
like the way that it visualizes the internet was so exciting, and I wish the internet was that instead of what it has become.
I would do anything to make the internet like battle network, even if it did possibly destroy the world once a year. I would at least it would be more interesting than the mundane way it almost destroys the world once a year.
Yeah, I dream of having a little friend inside my phone that I can like talk to, a little like cool Mega Man. But yeah, that those games
Mm-hmm.
were huge for me for sure. Like I played them all every year, and was like obsessed with that whole world.
They had like a toy that you could like to have like the virtual like whatever they called it, the Battle Network Warrior or NT Warrior if you watched the kids WB cartoon. They had a toy of it and I wanted it so bad as a kid. Never got it, but you know, the
For
still
sure.
desire is still there.
I know. I mean, now we kind of have it in the form of phones everywhere, but
Yeah,
it
but I
still
need
would be
that
better if
thing.
there was a little, and it'd be better if there's a little guy talking to me
Mhm.
on it. But yeah, those were all some really big games for me growing up.
It's time to focus in on the game that we both want to talk about. It's great talking about these games with you, but let's talk about the big one, my favorite video game of all time and yours, the game that you picked today, The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask. The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask was developed and published by Nintendo for the Nintendo 64. It is the second 3D Zelda game and a direct sequel to 1998's Ocarina of Time. Eiji Aonuma and Yoshiaki Koizumi served as the game system directors. This was the second time Aonuma served as the director of a Zelda game. He started on Ocarina of Time and would go on to direct Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, and serves as a producer on the series to this day. Yoshiaki Koizumi would go on to direct Super Mario Sunshine and Super Mario Galaxy. Program direction was done by Toshio Iwawaki, and art direction was by Takaya Imamura. Legendary composer Koji Kondo, known mainly for his work on Mario and Zelda, returned to create the music for this game. Shigeru Miyamoto, creator of the Zelda franchise, served as a producer and supervisor. Making the game a direct sequel made it easy to reuse the same engine as Ocarina of Time, which took 4 years to develop. Miyamoto and Koizumi developed the story and introduced the idea of a 3-day system, drawing inspiration from the 1998 time loop thriller film Run, Lola, Run. The script was written by Matsuhiro Takano. The story of Majora's Mask is set a few months after the events of Ocarina of Time, where Link, back in his child form, is on a quest to find his fairy companion friend Navi, who was his guide in the previous game. While traveling in the woods, he's ambushed by Skull Kid, a prank-loving woodland creature wearing a strange and evil-looking mask, and his two fairy companions, Tattle and Tail. The group steals Link's horse Epona and the Ocarina of Time. Link pursues them, falling into a trap where the Skull Kid places a curse on him that transforms Link into a Deku Scrub. Skull Kid flees, but Tattle is left behind as she was preoccupied with bullying the now transformed Link. Realizing she was separated from her brother and only friend, she demands Link help her find them. They find themselves inside of a clock tower where a masked salesman greets them and says that the mask that Skull Kid is wearing was stolen from him. He makes a deal with Link, saying if he can return Majora's Mask to him before he leaves in 3 days, he will return Link to his original form. Link and Tattle emerge from the clock tower and find themselves in the town square of Clocktown, which exists in a world parallel to Hyrule called Termina. With the help of some locals who bear resemblance to people Link had already met in Hyrule, they find Skull Kid on top of the clock tower at midnight on the 3rd day, where Skull Kid reveals he's using evil magic to make the moon crash into the town and end all life in the world of Termina. Link is too weak to fight the Skull Kid in his current Deku form, but Tail, Tattle's brother, yells to them that the power to defeat him can be found in Termina's swamp, mountain, ocean, and canyon. Link is then able to momentarily stun Skull Kid with a magic blast, allowing him to reacquire his ocarina, play the Song of Time, returning both him and Tattle back to the dawn of the first day, 72 hours ago. The happy mask salesman sees he reacquired his ocarina, teaches Link the Song of Healing, which turns Link back into his original form and turns the essence of his Deku form into a mask. The mask salesman realizes Link didn't recover Majora's Mask, suddenly flies into a furious rage, violently shaking and berating him, hysterically explaining that the Majora's Mask is a vessel of an ancient evil that holds the power to end the world. The evil has taken control of the Skull Kid, which is why he plans to crash the moon into Termina. Knowing that the power to defeat Skull Kid is scattered across 4 directions, Link and Tattle set off on their journey across Termina to defeat the evil of Majora's Mask. They only have 3 days before the moon. They only have 3 days before the moon crashes again, meaning they must travel back in time repeatedly, gaining more knowledge and power with each loop. Shenanigans ensue and repeat themselves. As for the gameplay, it's a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time, and it uses the same engine and many of the same assets, so much of the game does play similarly to Ocarina of Time. The hallmark Zelda items such as bombs, a bow, hookshot all return, but the structure of the game is wildly different as a result of the time loop and new setting. Link also acquires various masks that change how he's able to interact with the world, some in extremely helpful ways like running faster or appearing invisible to enemies, some that progress quest lines, and some that literally just transform him and give him new abilities and changes how he fights enemies, explores spaces, solves puzzles. The time limit also hampers how much Link is able to get done on a certain loop, and progress on dungeons and quests will be lost whenever he restarts a loop. However, masks and non-consumable items carry over after each loop, giving you not just more knowledge, but more resources for approaching challenges. The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask was released in North America on October 26, 2000 for the Nintendo 64. Other games released in 2000 include Counter-Strike, Diablo 2, Final Fantasy IX, Banjo-Tooie, Mario Tennis, Perfect Dark, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, The Sims, Vagrant Story, and Jet Grind Radio, also known as Jet Set Radio, which we previously covered on the show with Trevor from No Cartridge. Before we talk more about Majora's Mask really quickly, Jameisen, have you played any of these games from 2000?
Yeah, I've played some of those. I've done Mario Tennis, of course. I've never done Final Fantasy 9. I heard your episode on that, so I'm definitely curious. Or wait, no, you did 8, right?
I did 8. 9 is
8, okay.
I haven't played 9 yet myself.
You know what? I'm realizing I don't know anything about 9.
9's an interesting one. Do you remember Vivi from Kingdom Hearts 2? The little black mage? That's from Final Fantasy 9. I have the game downloaded on PlayStation 5. I just haven't played it yet.
You know, I did download that and I haven't played it. It's the one that goes, back to like medieval stuff. No, I feel like I haven't played Jet Set Radio. I've always wanted to, but that's one that I just never got around to. So I guess there wasn't a lot of other ones I was playing. And I mean, Perfect Dark. I guess that's the one out of all those I played a bunch of. I loved Perfect Dark. I loved Elvis the Alien. The laptop gun was incredible. So I guess that's the one that I can recall playing the most. But I mean, clear winner for Game of the Year right there, hearing that list. It's Majora's Mask.
Yeah, no, incredible games, but Majora's Mask does stand head and shoulders above all of these games and every other game ever released to us. So, look, it's hard to compete. This is going to be a very biased episode. Obviously, it was a big year, and it was a big lifetime of you playing video games. What ultimately made you decide on The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask?
So as I said, I loved Ocarina of Time. That was like a game that like my brother and I played together.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in charge of the strategy guide for Ocarina of Time. I'd read the strategy guide and tell my brother what to do. But I notoriously in our family misread, like I skipped some part of the instruction or the guide, and we couldn't figure out how to beat some totally minor thing in Jabu Jabu's palace inside his mouth. And my brother was so upset at me that like I just forgot to read one of the instructions on the thing. But it was like a thing we like played together, like that game. And then Majora's Mask was like, in my mind, it's like the first game that was like fully mine. I feel like that was on a console. Like that was the game that like, I don't even know if my brother ever even played it, but like I was so excited when it was like announced. And I remember there was like a Toys R Us promotion where like you could get a disc that would only, maybe it was a VHS at that time, I guess, that only like would show like just the trailer for the game.
Wow.
Because, it's like videos all over on the internet and whatnot. But I remember getting that like free VHS from Toys R Us and being like, this looks horrifying and I have to play this. And I remember when the game came out, I rented it at like my local video store that did video games as well, like day one. And I was like so excited playing it. And I remember thinking like, oh, I hope like, I was very young at the time. I was like, I hope that when I get this for Christmas from Santa, he gives me the exact game cartridge with the save data on it. So I don't have to replay all this. And obviously that's not how it works. My parents were not able to give me the exact game save data that I'm sure was deleted right after I turned the game back in. But I was just so captivated by this game and I was so scared of it. and I was definitely I was a very fearful kid. You get older and you learn that this is called anxiety, but I did not know that as a child. I was so wowed by how this game could like genuinely terrify me, but also excite me so much that like even just like that title sequence is so scary. The way
Yeah.
like it moves and that like slow motion and whatnot. And there's like a lot in this game that has this kind of like it kind of feels like in Wong Kar-wai movies where he'll do like he'll shoot in 12 frames per second and double it. So it has
Yeah.
this weird like motion effect to it. And like Majora's Mask does that a lot in this game.
Mhm.
That like just really terrified me to my
Yeah.
core.
But there's no like Dreams by the Cranberries playing, so it's just horrifying and you have to just bear witness to it.
No, it's this horrifying music instead of this like beautiful music.
Yeah, this MIDI music that sounds a little too much like the Laura Palmer theme or something like that.
Yes, completely.
It's scary. I remember as a kid, when my brothers were playing Ocarina of Time, the thing that scared me was when they were doing the Ganon fight and like he would turn into Ganon and like the lightning and the darkness of the face and the glowing eyes that had no irises was like, I'm hiding behind the couch. I literally would hide behind the futon and just like let them hash that one out. And then I would emerge when like the thing was dead and then the game was over. And I was like, yay, great. You win. You beat the ugly thing. Now imagine a whole game of that where like just by like getting to the title screen, I have to press start very quickly so I don't hear the loud whooshing effect of the
I
mask.
would do that completely. I was like, how fast can I hit this button to stop from seeing this?
Rated E for everyone. Yeah, I hated it, but it's also my favorite game of all time, and it's left core emotional scars on me that I love.
That like childhood fear is so fascinating and it imprints on you so hard. I think that like childhood fear, it just impacts you so much. I'm not like someone who like loves like scary movies or horror a super ton. It's not like the thing I gravitate towards, but like I definitely loved as a kid like, you know, like the feeling you'd get like watching like a Tim Burton thing as like a child where it's like scary and funny at the same time and it's that creepy and that mix and it's so fascinating. I think like, you know, I think Majora's Mask, as it was probably for you and for many people, I feel like it's a lot of people's introduction as a kid to like this extreme melancholy and anxiety and all these like deeper emotions. Like I think it's like it's a game so much where everyone's feelings are just kind of like bubbling and rising to the surface.
Right. Yeah. It is like not just like jump scary horror. It's more of like this bubbling dread that's building up and like you're just sort of bearing witness to like, oh, this is a very spooky, atmospherically scary, isolating feelings of looming death happening all around you. This is a very death heavy video game. It's a lot of like world is dying, the threat of the apocalypse is happening, people literally needing spiritual healing so they can pass on to the afterlife, ghosts everywhere. There's a whole canyon of the undead. It's death on death on death. And then there's just like a lot of morose, scared feelings. And there is moments of levity. It's a very funny game. I replayed the first section of the game in anticipation for this podcast, and like 10 minutes into the game, when like moments after Link transforms into a Deku, he looks into the screen and does a shrug at the camera because Tattle is being ridiculous. So it does have levity. It is a very funny game, but it is mostly just like atmospherically and sonically just like a very haunting video game.
Yeah, it balances melancholy and whimsy so well that it feels the most of any Zelda game like a fairy tale to me. It has that kind of vibe and that feeling to it. And like I think I really enjoyed when you talked before on a previous episode about how good Breath of the Wild is at selling loneliness and that it's how Tears of the Kingdom is so alive in a way that it's alone. And I think this game in Majora's Mask utilizes what we were discussing before about kind of the polygons and the liminal space feeling of kind of this era of gaming really well, where it's like, I think in an ideal version of Ocarina of Time, it wouldn't really feel lonely throughout it. It would feel fleshed out where like this game, it just adds to it that everything that you're like, it's that brilliant use of taking like that so much of this game is repurposed from pieces, character designs, and elements from Ocarina of Time and flipped around, but it doesn't feel like, oh, they're just trying to save money and time by reusing stuff because it recontextualizes everything and adds this kind of weird kind of daydream nightmare feeling that this game has. It's the dark chocolate of Zelda. It has this like bittersweet energy to it. This game at its core is about loneliness, and like every Zelda features that to a degree, but this game, like it literally begins because a kid is lonely, the Skull Kid. Like that's what leads all of this, and he's hurting other people because he feels rejected by them. And like, I think something that wowed me so much about this game, and I think like it's such an empathy machine. Like I feel like I learned so much about empathy playing this game as a kid, because like something that really impacted me is that like many of these characters that you help in this game are moved not because of the literal favors and things you did, but just because you actually showed that you cared about them. It's like it's not even that like you did this thing for me. It's that like, wow, you even like see that I'm alive, that I'm a person. Whether it's like there's literally like there's that ghost in the game who's like, you help them out by just watching them. He's like, I can't believe you can see me.
Yeah.
And there's so much of that element throughout this game that like this is like a Zelda game where like every character's heart is like in deep pain. You mentioned before how the music is very Laura Palmer's theme from Twin Peaks, and like I know that Link's Awakening is the Zelda game inspired by Twin Peaks, but like
Yeah.
this is so inspired by Twin Peaks as well. Like
Yeah.
this feels like Zelda as a soap opera drama. It's the furthest Zelda's like ever gotten from its like European medieval roots, I think, that it has this like very TV drama soap opera feeling.
Yeah. With Link's Awakening, like the limitation of its inspiration of Twin Peaks is like, you know, there is the central town and like the characters that you develop a relationship with, and there is like that feeling of dread hanging over it, but it's still like polygonally limited by the fact that it is a Game Boy game. This game is able to sort of like tap into that dread because it's a lot more technologically robust than a Game Boy game is, and like the sense of the central town and community, and also like the cosmic horror surrounding this community because of like the pain inflicted on somebody. Because like the big thing about like you know, the murder of Laura Palmer in Twin Peaks is like this is a murder that brings to light the darkness within the small town Americana. With this game, it's just sort of like the way that even a community that is as tightly like packed and culturally rich as Clocktown in Termina, there is still just a lot of like darkness and like isolation, and everybody in this town is uniquely isolated and scared in their own ways. So there's just like some sort of societal failing there. So yeah, to your point, it is very, very Twin Peaks in that way.
Yeah, the I think the person behind it, Yoshiaki Kazumi, who's the co-director of this, as you mentioned, like he was in charge of all of Clocktown and the ranch. Like that's what he focused on, his like stuff, and he also did the story for Link's Awakening. So you can really like see that tie, and like I think Kazumi is really responsible for I think a lot of the that element, that melancholy and darkness element. That even when he goes over to Mario games, like he did Mario Sunshine. And he did Mario Galaxy, and those both have those melancholy moments within it. There's like the light and dark of Shadow Mario in Sunshine, which is a little less melancholy, but like Galaxy has those kind of moments of you feel like that kind of sadness, so that depth. Seeing
the
like
Lumas and
space
Rosalina and stuff is all like very tragic.
Yeah, exactly, and so that so much comes from him in my research into this.
Yeah, and I appreciate you doing the research because it saves me some talking time here. And you're very smart and verbose as a writer. So, but yeah, no, you're very correct in like the Twin Peaks influence. But it's an incredible video game because it's about like the relationship dynamics of people and how you are dealing with people as a hero versus just like saving the world and like this overall thing. You're not saving a princess. You're not saving a princess and the world. You're saving people that you developed a relationship with, and your investment in saving Termina is with your relationship with the people in them, which is an amazing trick because if you played Ocarina of Time, like you've seen these character models mapped onto different people, you probably care about a little less after playing both of these games. You associate Anju with that character model more than you associate with the rancher in Kakariko Village, even though it's the same exact character model. And it's interesting talking about the isolation part, right? Because with Ocarina of Time, that's sort of like loneliness when you're in Hyrule Field, which has basically no enemies in the overworld. And it's just sort of like the vector through which you get to the other areas. It's just kind of like if that had more life to it, it would feel a little less isolating. But like to the point that Lon Lon Ranch feels like an oasis of humanity in the middle of these areas where like this in the middle of this open field that just separates the other communities that you have to go to facilitate the plot. And I spent a lot of time as a kid just hanging out in Lon Lon Ranch before getting into Majora's Mask because I just liked how serene it was in the middle of this nothingness. Even though like Termina kind of like emphasizes loneliness and isolation and fear a lot more. Termina Field is very brimming with enemies and life, and there's stuff to do. It's bigger. And the fact that like it's an intentional, like loneliness and isolation is an intentional part of Majora's Mask, and they obviously took the note that the field needs to have more life in it. It's just interesting. Like it's kind of like what was unintentional becomes very intentional in Majora's Mask.
For sure, yeah. It's a fascinating game. The way,
Mhm.
and even like, yeah, that it's like, there's more world life to the field. But even just the fact that like Clocktown is like this walled off section in the middle adds to almost like this loneliness feeling as well, too. That like you go from teeming with life to there's like enemies and whatnot, but there is that kind of space between you start seeing other people and whatnot. And like what I love about this game as well is like this, there's like a term that I use to describe like my favorite genre, I say, is purple fantasy.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
to me, it's like I love fantasy stuff, but like it's not like Lord of the Rings. I mean, I like Lord of the Rings, but it's not like the thing that inspires me the most. But it's that like it's fantasy that like when you think of like high fantasy or whatnot, you think about like green and you think of knights and all that stuff. But like purple fantasy to me is that element of like Majora's Mask is definitely under that with the green purple overtones. But like Dark Crystal Labyrinth, like things that have like like a little Muppety vibe to them. But there's also like this like scary element, or like Return to Oz is a huge one, which is like a truly horrifying kids film. Where like I feel like the first like 5 minutes of that movie capture like genuine horror and terror in a way that like no other film does. And I think that's something that I'm so drawn to, is that element of fantasy, but it's like this nightmarish fantasy. It's like it's dark fantasy, but it has this kind of element of like this kid fear that I'm so won over by, of having the like that you can look up and see this like horrifying moon with this like nightmarish face, which is just burned, I think, in anyone's memory who's ever played this game.
And it's
to think
always
that-
there.
Yeah, it's constantly there. And it was like a thing they added in like the last 2 months of this game, which is like insane that there wasn't going to be that face. Or like how the mirror mask is this like face permanently stuck in a scream. Or like the body horror of Link putting on his masks. And that like I was so scared of that as a kid. Like I would hit the button as fast. I didn't want to watch Link put on the Goron mask and scream in like pain as he wears it. And it's a genre that I feel like isn't done as much these days. There was that like Dark Crystal Netflix show, but like I'm so fascinated by that feeling where it's like just as likely to hear a pan flute as you are like synthesizers.
Yeah. It's interesting though. Like you talk about these like 80s 90s things where like you're using puppetry and traditional effects that don't look realistic but still look horrifying, and that kind of is in tandem with like early 3D effects in video games, where it's like, yeah, this is messy technology and like we aren't there yet, but that only adds to the horror because you do distinctly see faces in the shapes of faces in, because like that horror of the face is so important to Majora's Mask. Like the literal Majora's Mask is a terrifying face. The mirror shield is a terrified face. Every time you transform and watch the transformation, like it's your eyes hollow out and there's cracks going out, and it's pain. You're watching your hero character suffer like a American Werewolf in London painful transformation every time they put on these masks to do a silly little puzzle. Every time you look up at the moon, it's the space. So it's like we're at the uncanny valley, but it is still readable enough that you can feel the pain of the expression on their faces. It's not polar express, like not expressive. There's like enough expression for you to feel the intended chill in an E-rated video game. And yeah, like it's interesting. Like you talk about like modern adaptation. I didn't watch Dark Crystal. I heard the Dark Crystal Netflix series is actually quite good, but like obviously with digital cameras versus like film, it can still like create like a more clean effect, whether it's intended to or not. The artistry of limitations is such an important part of the creative process. I mean, Brian Eno talks about how like the second that something becomes obsolete, it becomes nostalgic. There's also something to be said about limitation in terms of the creative process with this game, because this was a game that was developed in an entire year, basically. So Aonuma didn't have to work on creating Ocarina of Time Master Quest or something like that. Miyamoto was like, look, if you can make it a Zelda game in a year, you don't have to work on this shitty side project that you clearly don't want to work on. He's like, okay, cool. We'll crank out a game in a year. And the stress of that obviously added to like the state, like sort of like lended themselves to like, oh, here are some apocalyptic stakes. The idea of not being able to get something done in time, the idea of like not feeling like you can do everything or anything. It lends itself artistically to the fact that we have to reuse assets and character models. And that's why we're just going to set this in a parallel world and also like redefine your relationship with the faces and people that you're seeing from the old game. It's all in service of the fact that they had to take 4 years of work and cram it into a year. And it's so artistically rich. And the fact that it created, I'm not an advocate for crunch or obviously like the idea of like having to turn something in on a tight deadline. And it's a conflicting feeling to have when this is a game that is basically the synthesis of a stressful time.
For sure. Yeah. I think the thing that you're describing to me is that it can be really easy to just iterate something over and over again and to continually try to like work on it. But like this game does feel like it's in some ways like in a good way first draft thoughts of like what characters say. And like I think that often that's better writing in general. Like I think that's oftentimes your like initial thing is truer. That like there are plenty of times, especially like working, in comedy or whatnot, where it's like you'll write a funny joke and then as time goes on, you guys kind of get bored of it and you rewrite it and you rewrite it. And then sometimes I'll just be like, it was funnier before. It was better before. Like that initial thing has like a life and a spark to it. And I think this game is like full of that, where it's like, if this had more oversight and more time to be put on, would they be like, I feel like someone would be like, well, this character can't be so depressed. Like this is for kids, but because it's in that shortened time period and they just have to have the ball always rolling, it feels more organic. I just think in general, this feels like more real because real life is less polished.
Yeah, organic is a good word for it. I was going to say raw. It just felt like a lot of people not being able to feel lucid about, there's no like, I'm going to say a sloppy word here, post-nut clarity in terms of like putting something onto like the page there, because it's kind of like, we got to do this. We got to get that, like a year, guys, a year, we got to get this thing out. And then like, no one can like sit there and be like, why the fuck did I put that in there? Why did I do this? Why did I write that? That was too much to say at that time. I feel horrible about it. Like it's all on there and it's authentic. I mean, it adds it again, like the synthesis of like the conditions under which this was made and what we are seeing on the screen, like some like Werner Herzog Fitzcarraldo situation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and they're also like these people like Ocarina of Time is this like, big epic myth. And that's the type of writing and stories they're telling. We're like, this is not that. This is like, I mean, why I love it is because it's just a game made up of side quests essentially. And like, I think that like they're writing and they're putting in themselves into these characters in a way that you can't for Ocarina of Time, because no one's living that big hero's quest journey. But for this, like, like there's the whole, I'm sure we'll talk about it more, but the whole like wedding plot and whatnot. And like all of that literally comes from the developers going to one of their coworkers' weddings. And at the time, North Korea had just like shot a missile that has gone over Japan. And they're like at this wedding being like, this is like kind of terrifying. Like a missile could just end everything right now. And we're here like celebrating. And that's literally why they came up with that subplot of putting a wedding in this and having the moon be in place of like the missile, or all these characters being like, I hope I can finish this on time, or being kind of like frustrated by having to be on a rush. That it's like, it's all these people writing about themselves. And that's why it feels more real in a way than any of kind of those big mythic stories feel.
Yeah, like it is that raw, organic thing, because instead of like having to think about something to write about, everybody's just like putting how they're feeling about the deadline onto there. Like it's almost Kaufman-esque. We'll talk about the specifics because you alluded to the wedding side quest. We'll talk about the specifics in a minute. Before we do that, I want to talk about the availability of this game and how people who have never played this game are able to play it in a segment that I do every episode called No Country for Old Games. Video game preservation means a great deal to me. If you listened earlier in this episode, you remember me complaining about the fact that the Wind Waker and Twilight Princess are one of the few Zelda games that aren't on the Switch. And it's a thing as a consumer and as a person who just appreciates having art available in the world, that some people just have more difficulty being able to access and play works of art that mean a lot to people. And it's especially an issue with video games because there's not a lot of motivation for publishers to continue to support what they consider to be obsolete games because there's a more product mindset than artistic mindset about the value of video games. What I am going to do with this episode is look at the availability of this particular game, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, and rate its availability on a scale of A to ARG, which is me expressing my frustration and how difficult it is to find and access this game, and is in no way me covertly advocating for you to pirate this game. Piracy is what the Gerudo do in this game. Before we discuss the availability of this game, really quick, Jameisen, how do you play The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask these days?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't replay games a super ton. I find there's always like something new to do. That like the biggest way that I interact with older games is I listen to a lot of the scores of video games. Like that's like I realize that video games are a great thing to write to because they're designed to be looped. So like I'll listen to a lot of scores of games that I love, and it brings back those memories and stuff. But when I played a little bit of the game, and I did it on the Switch, the online thing. I don't have my 64 anymore, although I think my brother has it somewhere. But yeah, I play it on the Switch online.
Yeah, but let's talk about the history of this game's availability real quick. As stated earlier, this game was originally released for the Nintendo 64 in April 27, 2000 in Japan, October 26, 2000 in the US, and November 17, 2000 in the PAL regions. The Nintendo 64 version, which in America came with a gold-colored cartridge with a holographic sticker cover, which I loved, was how I originally played the game. It was a Christmas gift for my older brothers, and since then, the game has just lived permanently in my brain since that scary, scary Christmas. The game was re-released as part of the Legend of Zelda Collector's Edition for the GameCube in November of 2003. This was a limited edition collection of Zelda games bundled with GameCubes that you bought around Christmas of 2003. Which my dad bought a GameCube for myself and my little brother in around Christmas 2003, which means that I had this. And this was my own personal copy of Majora's Mask that I could play at my dad's house, I guess. The compilation disc included emulations of the original Legend of Zelda, Zelda 2, Ocarina of Time, and Majora's Mask, as well as a playable 20-minute demo of Wind Waker, and there were 2 little special video featurettes that celebrated the history of the Legend of Zelda up to that point. It was never commercially sold, as I talked about in the Wind Waker episode I did with Hamish Steele. I own this. It came with the GameCube that we got. My little brother probably still has that and the Nintendo 64 to this day. So, emulated versions of Majora's Mask also appeared on the Wii's Virtual Console in 2009, on the Wii U's Virtual Console in 2016. These digital storefronts are no longer supported by Nintendo, so you cannot buy a digital copy. A remake for the 3DS was developed by Grezzo and published by Nintendo, releasing in February of 2015. We'll talk about the remake later. What we need to know for this segment is that the 3DS is no longer supported by Nintendo, making it also an unavailable version of the game. You cannot access the Nintendo eShop and purchase it digitally. Any physical copy you find is going to be in the secondhand market, a used copy. Most recently, another emulation of the Nintendo 64 version has hit the Nintendo Switch Online service. For those who are subscribed to the premium tier of Nintendo Switch Online, known as Switch Online Plus Expansion Pack, you can play it there. You can't download it. You cannot purchase it outside of the subscription model. It can only be played in an app as long as they pay for the highest tier in perpetuity. Yeah, this is a frustrating one. Even though you can play the game on the Switch, it's in a service model. As much as I love this game, and it is technically available in 2 forms in my home right now, I cannot give it an A. Because there's so many ways I feel like this game could be readily available to players. I mean, there just needs to be a better way for Nintendo to offer their older games outside of a subscription model, which I've complained about the subscription model so many times already. I did it in the Link to the Past episode, the Super Mario 3 episode, the Earthbound episode, the GoldenEye 007 episode, the Kirby's Dream Land episode. If you're a regular listener, you know how I feel about Switch Online and subscription models as the only way of accessing something. It shouldn't be the only way. Preservation is an industry-wide issue, but Nintendo is especially bad at it. Do you have any comments, Jameisen, about availability?
Yeah, I don't mind the subscription model just because it allows me to play so many other games. But I understand your point about all of it. Like, I think the one thing that gives me hope is that boy, does Nintendo like making money off of games that they've made years ago. So they'll always find some way to get someone to pay for it. But like, I definitely see all of your points. I'll say the one thing that I do enjoy is that like I'm glad that it's not the way to get money out of us, but like I am glad that Nintendo sells the original console controllers like for the Switch. I started playing it on just the Pro controller, and I was like, it just doesn't feel the same. And then I use like the old 64 one, and it is crazy how game controllers are so much better than they used to be. But I am at least glad about like that like, I can play it with the original feel of the controller.
That is very fair, because I remember when I was just playing a little bit of this game on the Switch just to see how well the emulation was. Apparently, the Nintendo 64 emulation has improved significantly since it originally launched. So I didn't personally experience any technical issues playing the emulation, but I did have that frustration of like, I'm going to have to remap the controls for the Nintendo 64 app because there's no comfortable way to play a Nintendo 64 game on a traditional controller by virtue of the fact that there is literally nothing like the Nintendo 64 in a both derogatory and complimentary way.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's like the thing I was most wowed by playing with it was that like in order to go on the map, you have to hit like the L button and the Z button, which is just so not logical. In my brain, I would kept wanting to hit it's the R button and the Z button to like move around. I'm like, I just want to hit the L button. This is so complicated, but
Exactly.
It's so quirky.
Yeah, like it was very interesting with the GameCube version of the games because the way that they were able to do the C stick thing was like they would map the Wind Waker controls where X, Y, and Z would serve as the C stick in addition to the actual C stick control part of the GameCube controller. But here it's just kind of like, I don't know, buddy, you figure it out.
Yeah, it seems like a bad way to like. I don't think I would enjoy it at all playing it with the Switch controller. It would seem so difficult.
Yeah, no, and like I'm totally down with them offering the Nintendo 64 controller. I think my big issue with it though is like by locking it to the subscription model, you have to pay basically a monthly fee to continue accessing these games. So if your financial situation changes at any point in your life and you cannot like justify the subscription, because again, I'm subscribed to this subscription model and the PlayStation Plus one, and I actually have Game Pass, and that's all well and good for me because I'm financially stable. But if I were to lose my full-time job, I'd have to like, those would be the first things to go. And if I did have a Nintendo 64 controller, it would suddenly become useless because now I can no longer access the Nintendo 64 library. But yeah, you are absolutely right. I appreciate you taking the more positive take on the subscription because it is definitely very useful for people, especially if they haven't been able to play Nintendo 64 games at all before.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like I can just see if you haven't played the game before, I would want to own just the thing so I can experience the full way. But like it is fun for something like this where I'm like, oh, I can just easily pop it in. What am I talking about? I just click a button, and play it or try so many other games. There's just so many new games to play that I find it harder to do ones that I've done before sometimes.
Yeah, it's definitely a time thing for me now too, because if I want to be able to play new games coming out, and I also want to be able to play the games that I have to cover for this show, so it's very rarely that I get to replay a game. But I did want to like just make sure that I felt this game before I did. I literally just did the first loop as the Deku. Yeah.
Yeah, I did that in a little bit of the first swamp stuff, which I feel like I've played a million times. But I was wowed by how instantly it took me back. Where like I think my fear with replaying a lot of games is that they do feel less big or exciting sometimes because your imagination builds it up so much when you're younger. But like I was pretty easily sucked into this game in a way that I was pretty shocked. Where I was like, this still hits just as hard.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a reason it's our favorite game of all time. It's not strictly nostalgia. There is like very well done designs for it. And speaking to scale, I mean, I've certainly come to appreciate smaller environments that are just rich with the space that it has versus just like being the biggest space possible. I say that us just talking about Tears of the Kingdom and that being a map that is extremely huge and dense with stuff to do. But I'm also speaking to like the Yakuza franchise, which has like a few city blocks that you explore, and it's the same few city blocks in basically every game in the franchise, and it manages to never get old. There's no legal way to currently own this game or its remake physically, digitally, nothing like that. But if you want to look on a secondhand market and buy it, it's going to be probably prohibitively expensive to buy the Nintendo 64 version. You could probably get like a 3DS copy of the game relatively cheap, assuming that you own the hardware to play it, because there's also the concern about having to get it on obsolete hardware. But I'm glad it's at least available in some form on the Switch, so I could revisit it for this conversation, and so people who have never played the game can hopefully check it out if they haven't already. And if you're listening to this show, this is my favorite game of all time for a reason, guys. Please play it. This is no way to treat your classic games, though, and my favorite game of all time. So I can't give this an A. I won't give it an ARG, because again, you and I are capable of playing it, and the subscription model does matter to people. I can't be bitter about it. But this is a game that means a lot to me, and it doesn't just mean a lot to me, it means a lot to you. And it doesn't just mean a lot to you, it means a lot to a lot of people. This is one of the most critically acclaimed games of all time. It holds a 95 out of 100 on the review aggregation website Metacritic, making it the 4th highest rated Nintendo 64 game after Ocarina of Time's number 1, Perfect Dark is number 2, GoldenEye 007 is number 3. See, we brought it back to Perfect Dark somehow. And it's the 60th highest rated game on the website overall. The Nintendo 64 version of the game sold 3.36 million copies, making it the 12th best-selling Nintendo 64 game. The 3DS version sold 3.43 million copies, making it the 21st best-selling 3DS game. But we're not here to reduce the legacy of Majora's Mask to a series of sales figures and review scores. We're here to talk about what it means to us. So let's get into it, Jameisen.
Journey to distant realms. Explore the furthest reaches of the universe. Survive deadly dangers. Experience matters of the heart and more in a new actual play podcast. Join me, Audrey. That's right, just me, as I play tabletop games designed for one player. From journaling games to tarot games to even games that take me outside, I'm bringing you along for the ride. Join me for every episode of Alone at the Table.
What do you love about this game, and what does it do that you wish more video games would do?
I think at least like gameplay wise, what I love is that it is a game of side quests.
Mhm.
And that like I think this does the thing that like when I'm playing like the new playing Final Fantasy 16, I'm like, how much do I need to do some of these side quests? Like some of these side quests don't feel that important, and some of them do, and they feel like rewarding and whatnot. But like with so many games, there's just too much. There's too much to do in games, I think, these days. Like that's the thing I struggle with modern games is how sometimes open things are, but without really it feeling fulfilling. And I think that like this game smartly makes every side quest feel more important than the main quest. Like I don't really have much like in replaying it, I was like, I don't really care about doing the dungeons again. Like I just want to do these like quests with these characters and whatnot. And I wish there was a game that really could capture that for me, unless I don't know of it, but like nothing has done that. And like my dream for a Zelda game is to just do a bigger version of Clocktown. Like I love Tears of the Kingdom, but my hope before it came out was I was like, just give me a city. Like I want that big open world feeling of Zelda, but I dream of it being in Clocktown and a vibe like that, where it's this like big city where like, you know, and I love the stuff in Tears of the Kingdom with like Hatno Village and the mayoral election is the closest Zelda's come to that, but it still doesn't feel as alive as this game does, and the way that everyone interacts with each other. Because that's the other like genius thing about this game, is that it's not just that you're doing all these individual side quests, but these characters all interact with each other. On the first night, there's like that guy the robber who robs like the old lady. Then he like sells stuff to the market, and he appears later on in like the game. It uses every piece for each other, or like, you know, how Cafe and Anju have their whole like side story. But then also if you go to the ranch and you learn that like Cremia, the older sister, like rancher, like she has a crush on Cafe, and like Anju is her friend, but she like has to deal with this like quiet sadness of, I can't like make a move on this guy that I have a crush on. I have to like allow this to pass. And it's like those little details that make it feel so real in a way that few games really do, where it's like, I don't really think like the characters in this part of the game really know what's going on in the other part of the game, where this like really does. And like I remember reading that like they talked about wanting this game to feel like you're just overhearing people's conversations constantly. And like, you know, as like a writer, that's all I want to do is like overhear people's conversations, because it's like incredible material. And this game captures that so efficiently and effectively. And I think the other thing too is like what we've talked about before, of like just the vibe of this like melancholy and like sadness and whimsy in a way that I think like nothing else fully does. And like that's the thing that activates me the most, that like this is more emotional, and I feel like deeper than so many things that are quote unquote like adult to me. That's what I'm so wowed by, is those two aspects. And also, you know, like, I mean, the gameplay, we've barely even talked about gameplay, but the loop is so fun.
Yeah,
With like the
trust
3
me.
days.
Yeah, we'll talk about the gameplay a lot. I came up with I thought we were mainly going to be talking about like side quests and storylines, but I actually have a lot to say about the gameplay. So yeah.
That it's like it's incredible to have a Zelda game where I'm like, I don't think about the dungeons at all in this
Mhm.
game, and it's like not a knock on those dungeons, which I do think are good the last time I've done them. It's everything else just shines so brightly in this game, and I love that.
Yeah, it's interesting that this is like when people talk about Majora's Mask and they talk about their favorite parts, it's probably not going to come to the dungeon. It's going to come and talk about the relationships that you have with the characters of the world and like the highlight moments. Even if you do love the dungeons and have a lot to say about the dungeons of this game, they're probably going to talk about the cafe side quests. They're going to talk about the ranch stuff. They're going to talk about some side quests, like the actual act of getting masks. And it's very interesting that this is such emphasis on side quests because obviously how we're used to like Zelda games being made, there's always side quests that sort of enhance the longevity of the game. Normally, it's just to get things like better weapons or stronger defense. But I thought, like, when I was initially doing my notes, like in my head, I was like, well, you have to do like some number of side quests to beat the game. And yes and no, it really depends on how you define it, because there's like pre-dungeons that you have to do for most of the dungeons in this game, whether it's like going through like the Deku Palace to go and like find the
The most
monkey to learn
annoying
to
part of the whole game,
Yes.
I will state.
Yeah, that is. It is. It's but like then there's like having to do the Pirate's Fortress, and like that's a stealth segment that like works because by that point, if you have like been exploring, you might have the stone mask, or you have like more resources like the bow and arrow because you can actually stun the guards instead of like have to sneak past them as you do in the Deku Palace. Or there's the stuff that you can do in a kind of canyon prior to going to the stone temple in order to get the resources you need to do that, like getting the mirror shield and all that. Those are really good pre-dungeons, but I'm not talking about like those side quests. Like those are things that you have to do to progress the story. You don't have to really do most, if any, of the like townsfolk side quests in this game. I looked it up. You need 6 masks to beat the Nintendo 64 version of this game. And 3 of them are the transformation masks that you have to get anyway. So the Deku, Goron, Zora transformation mask. And then you'll need the Captain's mask, the Garo mask to get into Iconic Canyon, and the Gibdo mask. I think those are the only 3 that you'll need. Like getting the masks is great. They are super useful. There's very context useful things to do with them. The Great Fairy mask is super helpful in temples if you're trying to get the fairies around you. The bunny hood, probably every single person's favorite mask in the game,
Definitely.
increases your running speed, which in a time sensitive video game is going to be very important. Getting those masks is great. They give you a lot of bonuses, like having a bomb mask that you wear and you press B and a bomb goes off in your face and you take a little bit of damage, but at least you don't need to have a bomb on your person immediately. There's lots of great masks, but almost every single one of them is optional. And that's interesting because this game is probably 33 to 50% side quests, and there's only 4 main temples, which is, I mean, I guess the least amount. I think Breath of the Wild maybe ties it, but like even then you have Hyrule Castle at the end, so this is the least amount of temples of any Zelda game. It's weird. It's very weird, but it manages to make it work, and this is obviously all a consequence of them only having a year to develop the game. So instead of going for temples, they pad it out with the side quests, but the side quests are really the meat of the game, and the temples and everything else are the bones.
Yeah, it's so interesting that, like, I think because of the way it's designed, even though it is mostly made up of side quests, it makes nothing feel like a side quest.
Mm-mm.
It all feels so organic in a way that, like, so many games, it's like, okay, well, I'm choosing to do something that isn't my main quest. Even though, yes, your goal is to stop the moon from falling, it is in some other ways, like, your goal is to try and help these people. And, like, I think the element that, like, wows me about this game and, like, just floored me as a kid, and I still think about all the time, is the element that you can spend all this time helping these people. Like even like, you know, like spending the 3 days reuniting Cafe and Anju for their like wedding, and then you have to go back in time to do it again, and those people will not end up together now because you can't choose to do it. Like there's like this sadness to Link more than in any game. I think because of that, because of the element that, like, you know, you're helping these people and they're having like major breakthroughs. You know, you're like helping the circus leader when you get the Gorman's mask by like making him cry tears of joy, and you melt his cold, bitter heart, and then you have to go back in time and you'll never be able to help that person again.
Yeah.
And they'll just be bitter and sad. And you have to live with that knowledge. And that just really stuck with me always.
Yeah, and like there's no provision in the game where even if you're able to learn the inverted Song of Time, which will slow the actual like pace of time passing from the standard amount, I think it's about an hour it would take to go through 3 days normally. If you play the inverted Song of Time on the Nintendo 64 version, time slows down to like 30% of the pace. So it's about almost 3 hours of time that you would have to complete a loop. Even if you have all the time in the world, you can't still appease everybody or like deal with every single thing because there are events that are happening in tandem with one another. So you can't do one thing if you're doing another side quest. You can't save the bomb lady's supply because you're talking to Anju in the hotel about cafe, and you can't do the Romani, not the Romani Ranch. Yeah, that's the Romani Ranch in this one. Yeah, or the Romani Ranch side quest if you're doing the cafe side quest because those those storylines are happening concurrently. There's an alien invasion on one side of the map and somebody who's missing her fiance on the other side, and you have to choose between the two, even in the best case scenario where you can min max saving people's lives. It's this isn't the whole movie, but there's one beat in Groundhog Day when he is like finally like hit that point where he's like basically trying to do the most good in a day. And even at the very end, he cannot save the homeless man who is sick and dying. Like no matter what he does, he'll dedicate all of his energy to try to save this one person's life. And that person will always die no matter what. So even if you try to do the most good, it is simply impossible to do everything for everyone. And as a kid, that's a weird thing. You know what you have to do process-wise to get things done, but it is simply impossible for you to do everything in this game.
Yeah, it teaches you so much about time management. It teaches you, I think, empathy, hearing all these character stories, and yeah, and like the sadness I felt when I would help Anju reunite, and then later on seeing him just wander around sad and be like, you just don't have time. You have to focus on other things. You have to prioritize other elements. And yeah, and the clockwork nature of it is so fascinating. How everything does intersect and interact is something I love in storytelling in general. That it's it's a real everyone is the hero of their own story situation. Each character is going through their own stuff, and you are this interloper experiencing all of this and impacting things, but also nothing at the same time.
Yeah. Like you can't be Superman at the end of the Superman movie who was able to stop the missile and then go back in time and then also save Lois at the same time. It's just you can't do it all. You have to you have to play through the idea that something tragic could happen. I mean, you could save the world and beat the game at the end of the game, and eventually, maybe possibly, some people's lives will get better and they'll move on and go forward, and they'll have the opportunity to live better lives. But the simple fact of the matter is, some people can't be helped. That's a reality of a situation. It's something that you can actually take with you into the real world. It's great. It's great but it sucks.
It's wild. It's such a, and this game is filled with just dialogue that's just incredible. I even think about when you first learn the Song of Soaring, the owl is from the first time you play the song, we shall become eternal friends transcending time and place.
That's good.
Just what a crazy heady thing that he's saying to Link's what? Is he 10 in this game? 12? I forget how old he is in this game.
I forget.
But that's nuts to say, or the Happy Mask Salesman's final line sums up so much of the themes of the game, where he says, whenever there is a meeting, a parting is sure to follow. However, that parting need not last forever. Whether a parting be forever or merely for a short time, that is up to you. That's the final line of this video game? That's insane.
Yeah, the writing is really solid. There's just a lot of moments of profound impact, and a lot of the lines have become iconic. A lot of the shorter ones too, you've met with a terrible fate, haven't you? It's the first thing the Happy Mask Salesman will say to you, and it's just yeah, because that fucking goes hard. And it's yeah.
We got to shout out the Happy Mask Salesman, who's one of my favorite characters. He's incredible. He's such a perfect little creep, and he's such a good huckster. I feel he really reminds me of kind of a Phil Hartman character with that forever smile that you can't trust. Where I'm that's one of my favorite archetypes, and he's just so good, and the weird jump cut nature of him, and that he transcends time and space, and just even his name being the Happy Mask Salesman, And then when he like just shakes the shit out of you because you didn't get Majora's Mask back in the beginning.
No, Hartman is a good shout there. I love that because like Hartman's one of my favorite comic actors.
Oh, he's
like,
the
and I'm
best.
just trying to imagine him like, you met with a terrible fate, haven't you, buddy?
I mean, like, there's no one I wish I could have written for more than like Phil Hartman. I'm always trying to write a Phil Hartman type. He's so incredible, and a dream happy mass salesman.
No, what I have is a romantic abnormality. One so unbelievable that it must be hidden from the public at all costs. You see. Stop!
It's funny because Happy Mass Salesman is another like manifestation of the anxiety of the development of this game because like they're pretty much like, yeah, that's Miyamoto. That's just Miyamoto and like how he was as like a supervisor and a producer on this game because we all felt like the crunch and like things could fly off the handle. Like he is like a guy who is like very jovial and like presents as like a very like again happy mask salesman type, but then like will just like suddenly flip a lid because of like the limitations of something. So like they're very much developers writing their boss into the story in a very interesting way because he kind of looks like him too.
Oh yeah, I mean, I love that sort of thing. Like, I love the in The Incredibles, the villain syndrome is based off of Brad Bird, the director, and like he didn't even realize that's what they were. The artists were drawing like him until it was too late. He had already approved the designs and everything, and then someone pointed out, like, they're just drawing you.
Yeah, they didn't know that,
and I love that. That's such a funny way that also just makes it feel so much more real and thought out.
Yeah, it's great. And again, like it's just like one of those like this is a character model that we had from the previous game. Let's make him God in this one. Let's make him the living manifestation of God and give him all these philosophical thoughts and also have him beat the shit out of a 12-year-old.
He's the greatest. He's such a little creep hanging out in the clock tower. He won't go outside. It's so funny.
He's like an evil Tom Bombadil. It's very strange that there's like no real character that like has that kind of like nature in a Zelda game that I can think of off the top of my head, like a demigod kind of. This isn't like the strongest entity in the universe, but like you do not know the extent of this thing's power, and it could probably do a lot more than it's letting on.
Yeah, and I love that element that like you don't even learn much about him. I think like that mystery is so good that like you do get the sense of like he understands things bigger than you in this world, but like you don't get any much more context of what he's going to do or whatnot.
Yeah, and like by nature of the way that these games are made, you'll never learn more about this character again because like they're not going to do that kind of continuity. Still talking about like the actual gameplay joy of the side quests before we get specific about them. The thing that I struggle with side quests is like there are good side quests that are like in like a story thing. There are side quests that you do that are just sort of like here's more time you can spend in this open world. And then there's just like side quests that like the material reward isn't really worth the effort that you have to go through to do it because like even if it was like kind of fun to do because like hey it's a video game, you're having a good time, the mechanics are great, the reward is like some sort of like resource or disposable item. I love the way that this game's able to handle side quests where like the reward isn't like here's $100 or something like that, but here is a mask that has like a power. It's an item that's going to be in your inventory permanently in the game, and like it can be used to advance some other side quest that this will be connected to. Items are better than money or like something that you can spend money to buy. It's just like a very like direct relationship between like here's something and then this can contribute to something else and then this can contribute to something else and this can contribute to something. And like it's a pay it forward program basically with masks, but also if you want to get the best mask in the game or the final mask of the game, the Fierce Deity mask, which is like there to like basically make the final boss fight into like this epic but also ultimately trivial matter, the most powerful mask in the game that can only be used in boss rooms in the game and is built to be used to fight Majora as the Majora's Mask, you have to get all the other masks because you have to give them to the people in the moon and they'll be like, okay, great, this is enough trading stuff. Here is most powerful ultimate mask in the world. So like it does actually finally reward all the side quests that you do. Like there is an actual material reward for putting in the effort besides like filling in your inventory space.
And I think it's also like what you're describing is the element of that, like you're getting this like visual representation of the task that you did as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's like an emotional component to that it's like you're getting something related to what you did rather than just money or just like some item that's throwaway. It's like everything has some little use and comes into play in some way. So it's so rewarding, and it's what I think adds to making nothing in this game feels trivial or pointless. There's like no activity you can do where you're like, well, I wasted my time doing that, which like I do feel playing a lot of video games, side quests and stuff. There are plenty of times where
Yeah.
I'm like, you're just trying to like put more time into this rather than actually like move me or emote me in some way.
Yeah, I mean, there's no space for this game or time for this game to be trivial. So it's great that like everything they put in the game meaningfully adds to something immediately. And yeah, like you also have the Bomber's Notebook, which will like actually physically mark all of the accomplishments that are for like the named characters in the game. But it is also great that you also get these masks that have like very specific uses that you have in your inventory too.
For sure. It's also so interesting, I think, with this game that like there's the Bomber's Notebook, but there's no really great way to keep track of anything in this game. Even replaying it with the Bomber's Notebook, I was like, I don't understand how to utilize this at all. Sometimes I think games today can be so like, just go here, go do this. And that game, Majora's Mask, is just so free in this way that isn't overwhelming, but in a way that does kind of remind me of what Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom would become a little bit. That it
Absolutely.
isn't this like, go here, go do that. It's just you kind of explore and uncover things.
No, I 100% agree with that. And that perfectly ties into my next point here, which is like something I love on a pure gameplay level is like how loosey goosey it is in terms of like your approach to fighting the bosses. And the fact that you're able to rematch with bosses is important because like there's more than one strategy that you can use against a boss because it's not about, hey, use the dungeon item because they don't really do traditional dungeon items in this game. You get an item in like the side dungeon that you do leading up to the temple. And then what you get from the temple is like bow and arrow, then fire arrow, then ice arrow, then light arrow. You get arrow powers from the actual temples proper. But yeah, this is the first Zelda game where you can do rematches with bosses, which I always found to be like revolutionary at the time because I think all video games you should be able to fight the bosses again. Like they spent a lot of time developing that boss. And the bosses in this game are mostly good. I like them. I mean, like Georg, I guess, like it's how you make of it, but Goat and Adolwa, Twin Mold, the actual final Majora's Mask, those are great bosses to me. Goat especially is probably my favorite, one of the most fun bosses just to fight in a Zelda game.
That's the one that sticks out to me the most, for sure.
Yeah, it's just like literally like this giant mechanized, like four-legged, like machine with horns that you just chase in a circle. The recommended strategy is like you can roll as a Goron and like just keep hitting it over and over and over again until it like spins out, hits a wall, and then you can like hit it while it's down. But there's more than one way you can do that. You can just hit it with arrows, you can like do something else, and it would be harder, but there's a recommended strategy. And that's something that's great about the Nintendo 64 version of this game. It moves away from the idea that you have to like use the item of the dungeon. Because like this game's relationship with items is different just by nature of the fact that you can transform into a Goron, a Deku, and a Zora, or the Fierce Deity.
We haven't even talked about that, which is crazy. That's such a core part of this game, and we're so long into this, and we haven't even brushed the fact that you get to play as those characters.
Yeah, barely. Like it's hard to. Like I tried to take notes, but I can't be thorough. So we're just going to talk about the most joyous parts, I guess.
I mean, I love playing as a Goron. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Continue.
No, it's great. I guess that's your favorite transformation then?
Yeah, we can get it. Sorry, finish your point. Well, we can get into it.
I don't know. It's just great that there's multiple strategies, and the game is aware of that by like allowing you to rematch these bosses multiple times. Like it's immediately like when you fight Adolwa, it's like, yeah, there are these Deku flowers on the field. You don't gotta transform into the Deku to fight Adolwa. You can just like hit him. You can just try and hit him and see what happens. He doesn't have like a weak spot like a traditional like Zelda boss or boss in a video game would have. So like just the idea that like if you're just good enough at the game and know how to approach this boss, there's other ways you can fight it. Yeah, this game does have multiple transformations. Really quickly, what are your favorite masks and transformations in this game?
Yeah, I mean, the Goron's my favorite transformation. I mean, I like all the transformations. I think I would go Goron, Deku, then Zora for me.
Interesting. You think would you rank Deku over the Zora?
Yeah, I feel like swimming in 64 games just doesn't work for me always ever. Like I like the idea of being the Zora, but like I think also there's an element of like when you become the Deku that's just like it's just so shocking playing that for the first time, you know? But the Goron's the best. The Goron's definitely the one that I like the most. Like it's so being able to roll like that is so fun. And just how it changes the gameplay so much. But I'm also so taken by like I think maybe the reason why the Goron one hits me also so hard is not just that you become a Goron. Like you're becoming a specific dead Goron.
Mhm.
that like people in the town recognize and interact with. And same with like the Zora too, that like you're the guitarist in a band
Mhm.
is so interesting how that plays out, that it's not just you're just some random creature, and like how they interact with you so differently that way. Like when you are a Deku, no one really pays attention to you or wants to talk to you. It's
Yeah.
so interesting that they all have their own relationships. So like, these races are in like pretty much most Zelda games, especially since Ocarina of Time. But I think this is the game that goes into their culture the most and feels the like richest. Like you're not just seeing like, oh, here's where the Gorons live, but it's like you're seeing this whole culture of them, or like the Zoras in particular. Like it's not just here's where they live, but it's here's the band that's like performing tonight.
Yeah, there's a cultural part that you don't get to usually observe. And I think that's the nature of the fact that, like, let's really focus on, like, having a lot of, like, visually interesting areas to look at, even if this is a smaller game conceptually. So, like, the Zora domain is, like, this really interesting, very villagey area, whereas, like, the other one was just sort of like a rock with a waterfall in it in Ocarina of Time. Like, the Goron village, like, had, like, it was perfectly fine in Ocarina of Time. These places weren't like bad areas in the game, but there's just like it feels more like a village in this, or the fact that there's like a Deku society at all. I think this is the first game that's ever actually like acknowledged them as anything other than like enemies that you hit.
Yeah, I think it's the only one.
There are business scrubs in Ocarina of Time. You just like find them when you like go into holes in the ground and they're like, you want to buy a bomb or something like that. But like that's really it. Like this is the game that really like has like a full society of Deku who aren't just like people you can hit.
Well, in this one, they have deeds to lands they can give out, so...
Yeah, they own property. They're... Yeah.
They can probably vote.
I mean, they have a monarch, but they can probably vote for the king. But, yeah, no, there's, like, doing a lot more cultural stuff, and, like, the fact that you can transform and, like, people interact with you differently is just also a great detail. Obviously, because, like, you have the mask of the guy who just passed away, so you're going to take on that person's form. And they're just going to interact with you like that, which is like horrifying in the sense of like, oh, you don't know your friend died, or you don't know your village elder died. That's weird, but it's also like it's just like it adds a layer to the game.
Yeah, I mean, also it's like I love when you do meet the Beach Zora, whose spirit goes in the mask, and he like before he dies, he's like, I'm gonna die, and he's like, but I gotta play one last rock song for you, and does like a little one concert, and then he just finishes his song and goes, that's all, thank you. And dies.
Yeah, because art is another important part of this game. Like, it's about death, dying, existential threat, but it's also about, like, the reasons we keep living, which, like, in the cafe subquest, it's going to be about love. In various cultures, it's music or art, racing. It's very much about art and culture and finding reasons to live and, like, the power of community and all of that. It's great how this game is able to, like, convey feelings of dread, but also inspire moments of joy just because, like, this is a living, breathing world, which further invests you into saving it, but also just like immerses you in having so many people that you can talk to and learning so much about the people around you.
Yeah, because it's a game not just about trying to like save the world, but you're trying to like save these people individually. You're trying to make these people happy is such a big part of it. And you get your rewards once these characters are happy. And even the Happy Max Salesman, I think he talks about that, like, that it brings people joy. It's in the name.
Yeah. We'll talk about side quests more in a minute, but like you said, that do you really have anything to say about like the dungeons or the temples? Because before we get back to that, I do want to like at least knock the stuff that I do have here.
Yeah, no, I don't have any particular thoughts on them, but it's just I mean, like they're good designs. I mean, they're compact more than some other Zelda dungeons because they're designed to be able to be completed within that hour time frame. I feel like they have particularly haunting music in this game. I feel like most of the dungeons, I feel like it's very atmospheric. And the way that like Ocarina of Time has some atmospheric ones, but also there's some that I think has a little more music to it. And then of course, it's incredible doing the stone temple and having it like invert itself. And I think the stuff before doing the temples is also fun in this game a lot. That there's like an enjoyable aspect to it.
Oh, I agree. I wanted to talk about this because I mentioned the bosses and like being able to rematch the bosses. I love the temples of this game a lot, actually. And obviously it's not the highlight of the game for me. Obviously that's the side quests and the relationships and the people, but I have to give them their due just because they're just really special. First of all, like in Ocarina of Time, they have way more dungeons. They have the 3 preliminary ones, and then you have to do the medallion dungeons when you become adult Link. That game has more dungeons and you spend more of your time like actually just going through the critical path. This game, obviously, with just having 1 year of development, they're going to like fluff it out with the side content that is very rich and is the most memorable part of the game. But the 4 core temples that they do get out there are very interesting and all unique and all stick in my mind, even though I haven't played them in a few years. The verticality is a big part of it. Like, this is the second 3D Zelda game ever, and Ocarina of Time does absolutely use verticality to its advantage in the 3D space. But this one is really a lot more about like depths and height, like in the Snow Peak one, where you're like having to like change the elevation of something, or where you're changing the water and the rotation of the whirlpool is going in the central area in the Great Bay Temple. It's all about elevation. Like even the flipping of the temple in the Stone Temple is very much playing with stuff that would be impossible to do in a 2D space. So the fact that this is like actually using the 3D aspect of Zelda in a way that Ocarina of Time played with but didn't really refine, it's a mastery of something. It's really a realization and like a argument for the continuation of 3D Zelda games.
Yeah, and you can see that, I think, the direct line from that. I think from that to A Link Between Worlds, which also does so much focus on being vertical with like the 3D of it, and then down to like Skyward Sword trying to do that and not being able to do as much as they want, and then them fully realizing verticality with Tears of the Kingdom. That like, you know, the whole overworld is based on a verticality.
The depths are literally underneath you. It's not like the Dark World in The Link to the Past where it's like a parallel dimension. It's a literal world underneath you, and there are places that you have to like access and exit through to get to the depths while you're still in the process of exploring them. And then like there's also that whole like all the islands in the sky. It is like really playing with the parallel world stuff in a different way that like all these games led up to in a cumulative way. And verticality is a big part of that. Like you can actually feel the scale and size of these temples in Majora's Mask because they're sort of like visible. They're visible things, and I don't know. The scale is just very impressive for how this is, and the visual design is a big part of that. Like I love the visual design of these temples and how busy they look and how distinct they are. They aren't just like here's ice, here's water, here's fire. It's these pipes and like intricate plumbing system for the Great Bay Temple. The ancientness that hints at like a dead society in the Icana Stone Temple. Yeah, it's all just very visually interesting, and it's very richly and detailed, and those details still stand out to me and are very memorable in my mind, like the giant stone face in the Stone Temple. But it's also a game that just rewards visibly examining these details, because as complex as these dungeons and temples look, like, wow, you're looking at all these pipes and you're just like overwhelmed at the idea of having to like change the pipes and the water and everything in the water temple. But when you really look around and like familiarize yourself with the space and think like, here's where this is in relation to that. Let me look up. Let me look below me. Okay, I'm more visually aware of that. The game is actively rewarding you for taking in the environment, and these dungeons become a lot easier because you have like the requisite understanding of space around you, and familiarity is rewarded. On top of all that, these dungeons are very smartly designed around a 3-day time limit. I don't normally read listener comments before the end of the episode, but I wanted to highlight this one. I usually wait until the end. But here's one that a comment left by Twitter user at No I'm Jory. They said, I always loved this game over Ocarina of Time as a kid. Manages to create an incredible tone in the world that is unmatched. The mask gimmick rules. People's common critique should be re-examined by playing the game first, because the time limit has a scarier vibe than it does actually affects playing. And they're 100% correct, right? That like the time is like a stressor, but it isn't as overwhelming and stressful as people think it is. They're 100% correct about that. It's a scarier vibe in theory than it is in practice. It's workable, but it isn't as limiting as you initially expect it to be. It adds not just length to the game, but texture and depth, because it is an actual material threat to the apocalypse, and it interrupts your gameplay, and it like heightens the stakes of what you're doing. But ultimately, it isn't as daunting as you think it is in the early game. There are ways where you as a player can work around it. We talked about inverting Song of Time, which will slow passage of time down. It's an illusion at the end of the day. Like, yes, you will eventually run out of time, but there's plenty of time, and there's many ways that you can work around things if you do run out of time. It's an illusion, it's a magic trick, and it's a game that it's a magic trick that the game keeps doing vis-a-vis its dungeon design too. It looks scary, but it's actually easy in terms of like, oh, these pipes and everything look complicated, but like once I actually take in the environment, it's not that hard. Yeah, it's just like you familiarize yourself with the space, you look past the illusion, these temples become easier, And even if you do run out of time, you don't have to do the whole dungeon all over again like people think they do, because once you get the item or that arrow, you can just skip most of the rooms that you did taking to get to the arrow, because the dungeons are designed where it's like, here's this stuff over here, there's the item. Okay, now that you have the item, go do all this stuff. So like you can basically skip half the temple if you do run out of time. It's designed that way. The reward for being able to do everything in a temple in a single run is that those great fairies, the stray fairies, are all scattered around the temple. And if you get all 15 in a single time cycle, then you get the bonus item, which is like enhanced magic, extra defense, stronger sword. So you are rewarded for like being visually aware and getting everything done in a run. But if you don't get everything done in a run, you still don't have to do the whole temple unless you insist on like getting the stray fairies this time.
Yeah, it feels like this game, I think, is the best reward delivery system of any game I've like played. Where it's like, it's always giving you something so useful, and it's like always giving you something that like changes or affects or enhances gameplay. It never feels like, oh, you're just getting like, like rupees for no reason, or some bullshit item that doesn't really matter. It feels like it's all impactful and meaningful.
Exactly. But let's talk about those side quests now, how that these reward systems work. What are your favorite side quests in the game?
I mean, I feel like Cafe is a big one for sure, because that, that's the one that spans the full 3 days. It is the most fleshed out. But I think like my favorite area and thing maybe is I love getting the access to the milk bar. I think like it's like fun doing the ranch stuff, but the milk bar itself is my favorite location in the game. I would say that and the inn are my two favorite locations. I love the milk bar because it is just, it's just so funny that they put a bar in and made it milk. But like, I do love you play the song in order to get the circus leader mask, and that it is like, he starts crying tears of joy is such a impactful moment to me. And the score so good in the milk bar. Mm-hmm. And then I think everything interacting in the inn is so exciting too, because that's such a big hub. I love just standing in that inn and seeing the like Goron post-delivery guy like come through with like a little hat and bow tie, and that there's like a room already reserved for whatever name you choose, and then later on someone tries to come in with that name and they're like, we already gave your room to someone else. All those little details I think are so fun. So I think like I'm most impacted by areas and the side quests that interact with each other the most, I think.
No, yeah, that's great. I mean, like the cafe side quest is basically a character that the process of figuring that one out is that you go to the mayor's office, which is another hub where a bunch of people are hanging out and like have things going on. And one of the people sitting around is the mother of Cafe, who has gone missing days before the wedding was supposed to happen with Anju. And like they're basically like recruiting you, like, hey, could you help me find my son? Here's a mask of his face. If you just go around wearing this mask and see what people say about it, maybe we can find my son. And you're like, okay, I'm just going to go wear this mask, and now I'm going to go have to talk to people. And I mean, like, I have this game from muscle memory, so I always know exactly where to go with the mask to perpetuate this thing. But like, I think the really cool thing about this is like everybody has like some kind of reaction to you wearing that mask, and like they all have an opinion, but they also like don't know what's up until you go to Anju at the inn that you talked about, and she's like, that's my fucking beyond. We need to talk. Let's meet me at this specific time of day after my shift, and then we can progress the storyline. And then it becomes like this investigation into like finding out like, where did this person go? Why are they missing? How can we find them? Why did they disappear? How do people around the family and involved with the wedding feel about it? And then you do find Cafe, and then like, bam, the stakes are boosted by the fact that like, oh yeah, I love my fiance more than anything in the world. I'm just cursed to look like a little boy right now, and that is horrifying and humiliating, and I don't know what to do. And it's like, oh yeah, the Skull Kid just cursed me. I'm cursed, sorry. And then you have to help. Yeah, go ahead.
I love when when you meet with him, you get a memory pendant, and the text says, you may not understand these grown-up manners, you may not understand these grown-up matters, but you should take it anyway. It's also just such a funny bit of video game text.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, this is a storyline that, if done properly, will take you across all 3 days. If you do something wrong, you have to start it all over again. The process has to begin. You have to go through everything. So God forbid that you mess up a sequence, but you're involved in the story and you care and you want what's best for them, and you don't know how Cafe is going to be cured or fixed or everything like that, but you at least want to help this couple, like, be there for each other as best as they can, given the horrifying circumstances that they're under.
Yeah, you interact with so many characters. You meet Anjanu's grandmother, who like has dementia and is calling thinks that Anju is someone else. And yeah, it's such a layered storyline. And like I was really taken by I watched like a playthrough of all that in order to have it in my head still. And like there's such a wonderful final shot when they do like reunite with each other, where like the camera starts from Cafe's view from like down below, and then it moves up through a table and over it to show Anju's like point of view of like Cafe. So like you see the relationship from their 2 points of view, and it's just such a wonderful like camera movement, which is not like a thing I think about a ton about like in games of that era.
Yeah, when I was looking at some of the cutscenes for this, I was like, wow, this they really did some tricks on this one. I don't know if like people were actively learning from Metal Gear Solid after this, or maybe they did do really cool camera tricks in Ocarina of Time and I just don't remember, but there's really strong direction in this game.
For sure.
Yeah, no, it's great. And like the other great thing about this quest is like obviously you get to know people better through this. Like you understand like the deal with like the late night shopkeeper, but also like there's a villain to this story, which is like the guy who on the first night steals the bomb bag from the lady in the park. And that's something that you can't stop now because you have to talk to Anju at that specific time of night. Because like one thing you can do is like one of the few NPCs you can kill in any Zelda game is the bomb guy if you handle the side quest incorrectly. If you like shoot the bag with an arrow instead of like cutting it down with a sword, he'll just explode.
Die!
And obviously you can't continue that quest line if the guy's fucking exploded. So like you have to let that bomb lady have her bag stolen. So like that guy talks to the late night salesman and like he can give you the location for like where this guy's hideout is, which will like help you find the missing mask that Cafe needs to complete the ceremony for their eventual wedding. It's like all interconnected in a weird way, but also like in a way where it's like it serves that purpose of like you can't help everybody in the game.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, just the way that everything interacts. I mean, yeah. I love that you can't. You have to like let that old lady get attacked in order for this other thing to happen, and the feeling of like watching that and allowing it to occur is just so impactful, I think, on the audience.
Yeah, it's a wonderful experiment in cause and effect in video games and like the interpersonal consequences and in-game consequences of it. And then, like we said, like the other major quest line that takes place over 2 nights, the Romani Ranch, you can't do that and the Anju stuff at the same time. And there's history with like Romani and the people involved in the wedding, and like she'll open up to you about it if you continue that relationship, so you feel for her from a different angle. But it's funny because like you learn that information because you're basically neglecting that storyline. It's all very interesting.
Yeah, you learn about like you're often learning about other storylines even when you're not doing that storyline, which is what I love, is the way that everything intersects, and that's what makes it feel real and makes this like this is playing a soap opera, which is what's so fun about it.
Yeah, like there's so much on the farm alone, which is like outside of the town and like has like different people who work on it, and each person involved. Like there's a dog racing track there you get the bunny hood in that area. You get Epona back because it's a ranch and that's where the horse ended up in Termina. And there's like, again, like one of the more compelling side quests, which is like you're stopping an alien invasion, an alien abduction of your cows from the farm. And like what also happens is like if you fail to stop this alien invasion, like it's not just the cows that get taken, but like the young Romani's sister, who's like your age, she gets abducted and probed, and like it's scary because like I think she comes back, but like she's just like completely stoic and silent, like they did something with her brain. So like there was like not just like like you're saving a woman's business, you're saving her sister from being kidnapped by these weird alien creatures that look like these cryptids, I guess. Like they're horrifying. I don't like looking at them. They're actually genuinely scary looking aliens and not just like weird bug-eyed Area 51 Roswell aliens.
They're so unique. And I mean, I think that's something that I love too, is that I'm like, also there's aliens in this game. It's like insane. There's so much to it, and it's playing with all these different elements versus like an Ocarina of Time, which is so clearly doing that classic epic myth. Mm-hmm. And this is pulling from so many different threads and so many elements and putting it into this like blender that there's always something like insane to discover at any moment.
Yeah, like you are a character wearing a green tunic and a sword and a shield, and you're on a farm that's like almost like 19th century farm, stopping aliens from taking cows and probing people. And like they don't use the word aliens, but like the music that's unsettling is like giving an alien vibe. They're floating. They have like a weird little like flowy spaceship. It's clearly they're monstrous in design, and they assume that they're monsters, but those are aliens.
It's wild.
Mm-hmm. And that's just the first night. The second night, you have to help her with a shipment of Chateau Romani, which is implied to have alcohol in it, but they never say it outright. But it's kind of like, this is adult milk. Don't drink the adult milk. But like, there's a rival gang that lives near the farm, and you have to like stop the delivery from being sabotaged by this like hood-wearing gang, and you fight them off. And then she's like, "Thank you for saving my business. You really saved my life today. This means a lot. I really appreciate you helping me out over the past couple days." That's great, and you get a lot of rewards out of doing all this stuff.
Yeah, there's such depth to all of this. I think that's the thing is like, and also I think maybe another element too is that when you play a side quest, often in other games, you do feel like you're playing a side quest, but in this, it's these people's lives, so it never feels like that. It always feels just as important as the main mission, because to them, this is their main mission. You know, to her only goal is to get that milk to the bar in order for them to get paid so they can keep paying for the place. And there's a whole backstory about their parents. I believe that they die at a young age, or they died already. And so like, you're really also like so thrusted. I think this game also really gets that like, this world doesn't exist for you. You exist within this world. It feels like these people have full lives and histories outside of the game. And they do, because when you're off in a temple, the UFOs are coming and they're getting taken. Like all these things are still occurring and whatnot. So it just feels alive in a way that I don't think anything else comes close to replicating.
Yeah, like there's nothing for you to do at Romani Ranch the third night. I mean, you're welcome to hang out and just keep doing stuff there, because like that's fine. But like there's no material gain for like doing stuff on the third day. But if you do stay there, like there's still like, when the third night happens, which is like, oh my God, wait, hold on, the world actually is dying. No matter what people feel about it, because like it's another thing, like people have different feelings about the moon. Is the world going to die? Who knows? Let's just keep going. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. Or people going like, fuck, I think the world's going to die. I don't know what to do though, because like other people don't believe it, which is like a great exploration of herd mentality and totally parallels with everything going on in our lives, because we're constantly afraid of dying.
That's what hit me so hard, was how much I was like the mayoral debate when they're all in the office talking about whether to cancel the carnival or not because of the moon. I'm like, this is COVID discussions all over again. This reminds me of like lockdown and all those things. It's wild how much it feels even more impactful now.
Yeah, it's like climate change. It's like threat of anything to our existence. It's all like, this is real human behavior. This isn't just like narrative. This is all true to an extent about like our relationship with like world threatening events, especially like the threat of nuclear war or anything like that, where you're just not sure what tomorrow is going to be like, and people are scared or in denial about it, which is just another form of fear that they just can't process. So like on the third night, like lots of people are reacting different ways to the obvious like reality now that the moon may actually fucking hit Clocktown and destroy the entire world. So like with Romani and her sister, like you see like they're together, and she's like, I'm going to give her some Chateau Romani, which is like normally an adult drink, but I think this would help her make peace and like get through the night, sort of thing. There's a swordsman that you can like do, you know, sword challenges with in Clocktown, and like he has like this bravado of like a strong, you know, wise swordsman. But then like if you go into his house on the third night, you can't find him, and then like you cut behind a sign and you see him cowering in his closet, like hoping, begging that the world doesn't end. Or like there's just the postman whose like whole thing is like, I'm dedicated to my cause. I can't stop. I have to deliver the mail every day. This is my job. This is my career. And you have to help him make peace with like the idea of staying alive the next day.
Yeah, I love I was just gonna talk about the postman. I love the postman.
Yeah.
And I love that like the final day he's like cowering in his office saying he like wants to free, but it's not written in the schedule, and delivering mail is his highest priority. And then you can read a letter on his bed that he wrote to himself that says, "Dear myself, you've been doing a great job." Like, I love that he has to give himself this like pep talk, and then he begs himself to flee like other people have. but he doesn't because he's so dedicated to his job and his career that he doesn't know who he is without it.
Yeah. And like you can motivate him to actually like go through and flee if you give him a piece of mail and he's like, "Oh, this is something I can do and then I can deliver this and like that would mean I don't have anything to do and then I can get out of here." And then like you can actually see him flee and like you can watch him deliver the mail and then like get out of there. And it's like you gave a person peace and regardless if like the world actually ends, which you know it won't because either you'll go back in time or stop the cause, like you'll stop the end of the world. You gave a person something.
Yeah, and then you have to go back in time and not help that person at all, and then they'll be terrified until you reset the clock over and over again.
Yeah, but it'll be fine. So yeah, we've talked up and down lots of amazing things that this game has done. It is truly our favorite game ever, and like you can hear it in the way we talk about it. What do you wish this game did better?
I thought about this question. What would I think it could do better? Because it is my favorite game, so it's hard. But there is one thing that drives me nuts in this game every time I play it, which is anytime you pass for the first time that Deku business scrubs flower, you gotta watch that little cutscene where he flies down and tells you about how, you can't use it and need the deed and whatnot. And I can't explain the number of times that I've just been doing a loop and I'm just trying to get to a location and I just pass it and I go a little too close and you have to watch that fucking cutscene over and over again. And I mean, hey, if that's my biggest complaint about this game, it's pretty damn good. I think on a more realistic level, there's also, I think, like the being unable to save without quitting feels like a real pain. That it's like whenever you do save at the owl statue, it like fully like quits you out. But I guess that like also, it's designed to make it that you're really in that run when you're doing it. But as an anxious person who like doesn't want to fuck something up, I want to be able to save at any time, which is why it's a relief that you can do the saves at any point on the Switch online. Being able to do that helps so much. I find the platforming a little tough, on like on the 64 level, especially like when you're doing the Deku shrub in the palace element. I would just keep missing. And thank goodness I could do those save states because I was like, this would drive me insane. And then I instantly flash back to that issue when I was a kid in the same spot. But I'm a critical person. I love to criticize things and complain. Seinfeld is what introduced me to wanting to be a TV writer. When I was a 4-year-old kid, I looked at George Costanza and I said, "This guy gets it."
We're living in a society. We're supposed to act in a civilized way.
I just don't really have complaints about this game. It's so good.
No, yeah, it's like I love everything about this game, and like it's hard because like the things that people like understandably have criticisms for are just like this is like how the game was made. It's kind of like you have to take it or leave it and have to understand in the context of like why is the game structured the way it is. They only had a year to make it. So if your issue is like there aren't enough temples or dungeons, that's just kind of like, yeah, but like they made a different game that's not a traditional Zelda game because of like the limitations that they had, and like the outcome of this, limitation was one of the most unique titles in one of the, most successful franchises ever. There are
But also
people
it doesn't feel like it's missing a dungeon. In the same way that like when you play Wind Waker and it's clear that they cut one of those dungeons out, with the you talk to Jabu Jabu. With this, I don't want another dungeon because it's not designed for that. Like, and there's enough content there elsewhere that like to me, I don't even think adding another dungeon would make the game better. It would add more, but more doesn't mean better.
It doesn't. I think this is a game that's very confident, and it released with like the sense of completion. Like with Wind Waker, we talked about it in that episode with Hamish. Like that is like one of the most like obvious like compromised by cuts games because like you can clearly see where like the time savers were. Here, everything is sort of complete and full and like designed to accommodate the fact that they had such a limited amount of time that it doesn't feel like there's anything missing, to your point. And there's plenty of like side stuff and side dungeons that it doesn't feel like there's anything truly missing from it. I mean, there are people who like don't like the 3-day system because the anxiety that it gives you, but I think we kind of covered it earlier where it's more of like the illusion of a problem versus like the actual existence of one.
Yeah. And like I guess maybe the one thing I do wish, I don't know, I'm of two minds because I do think it makes it better in a way that it is hard to keep track of things. That like there is no easy system. Like, it's not mapping everything. But I did feel replaying it, I was like, well, I just don't have the time or brain space to like remember all those like little details or stuff. Like, I did find myself wishing there was a better way to keep track of things, which I think they did in the 3DS. But I played the 3DS version, but I don't remember really anything of it.
They did, yeah. They entirely revamp the Bomber's Notebook, where you are able to organize things that you have completed and haven't completed more. It's more obvious
Okay.
visually what's going on with it. They also like give you hints, the Bombers, in terms of like rumored events for stuff that you probably haven't gotten to yet. So yeah, they did a complete overhaul of the Bomber Notebook, which is probably more your speed. And they also have a system to set an alarm for like when a sequence is about to happen. So you are like, oh wait, yeah, I'm supposed to be doing this in the sleep. Let me go there now instead of yeah.
Yeah, and all those things are so helpful, but like I also understand the other component that I'm like, but part of the magic is how much it doesn't hold your hand through things. You know, like the laziness in me wants those elements, but like I do think it it doesn't feel like a flaw to me that this game doesn't have those elements in the original version because it all works thematically and holistically with everything it's trying to do.
Yeah, when I try and like do this segment where like or question, I always try to like approach it from the consideration of this was a game made in 2000. What were like the standards and realistic things it could have done at the time? There's stuff that the 3DS remake does make in terms of quality of life that completely changes them. Like for example, when you play the Song of Double Time, which fast forwards things in the original Nintendo 64 game, it takes you from like this to the next evening, or if it's the evening, the next morning. But in the 3DS, you can like literally set the hour you want to go forward to. So you have to do less waiting around if you're carrying out a specific thing. And that's just a tremendous quality of life improvement. But I didn't feel that as like a significant problem in the original because like you wouldn't have to wait around that long, maybe just a few minutes. But if you're playing on a handheld, you also just have less time because you are probably doing it on the go and you are limited by a battery life. So that's just good quality of life change to make on a handheld versus on a console.
For sure, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
So what I will say though is the controls of the game aren't great. I do think it is definitely built for the Nintendo 64 controller, but a thing that makes itself an obvious problem is how many items you are responsible for juggling in this game versus Ocarina of Time, where like you can spend most of the game with like, at least 2 items mapped constantly, and then like you just have that third item that you're using for a specific dungeon. In this game, you're going to have to like reconfigure that C item of 3 things a lot because you have masks, you have a transformation mask, and then you have an item that you may be needing to use, like the Lens of Truth or a bomb or a bow and arrow or a hook shot, and you have to hope. I don't know. It's a lot to juggle. And that's another accommodation that the 3DS is able to work around because with the touchscreen, you can like map things where you can just like, here's the mask button I can tap instead of having to map it to X and Y, which you can keep the same couple of items on regularly. You have to pause a lot in Majora's Mask because you have so many different things that you have to switch around.
Yeah, it's a lot of items for sure.
Mm-hmm. But it's limited by the controller, so it's like it's a flaw, but it is like it's not just keeps it from being my favorite game of all time sort of thing. But yeah, no, I don't have like too many issues with the game that aren't just like, oh, it's aging and it's showing its age a little bit.
Yeah, it's like I wish I had a better camera, but it's like no game of that era has like, the perfect camera control.
It had one of the better cameras at the time when you think about it, because like the Ocarina of Time was the thing that introduced like targeting, or at least was the thing that popularized targeting your enemy instead of having to walk up to it with no camera and hit it. So it was rough, like the camera, especially when you're doing that top-down stealth section in a Deku thing, are horrifyingly like clunky. But look at the Nintendo 64 controller and tell me what you could have done to fix that.
Totally.
Yeah, no, lovely game, amazing game. And if people have an issue with like the fundamental foundational like way this game was made, which is like the time system or the limited dungeons, like I understand that. With the time thing, I think as a person who has like been diagnosed with anxiety at an early age, like had to go to therapy as like a 9-year-old often because like I had like such anxious thoughts, like that wasn't something that bothered me too much. And I think it may have helped me with my anxiety more than it hurt me. And I think if you approach the game with an open mind and a willingness to engage with it and what it's trying to impart to you, you can actually probably come away a better, or just feeling better about some things about your real life than those who hadn't. Like, I think that this was a game that helped manage stress more than it actually exacerbated my stress.
Yeah, and it's so built into the game itself of even having like, how the music becomes faster and more anxious feeling as the days goes on, that like the first day feels so chill musically compared to like the final day, that like it all enhances it thematically, that like yes, it can feel stressful playing it, but like the intent is that like that's part of the fun of it, is that it's making you feel those things because the world around you is experiencing this sudden
Mhm.
sense of pressure.
Yeah, and that's I guess another thing. If the game is making you feel stressed and it is like instilling a sense of panic that is very difficult for you to manage, I'm not going to tell you suck it up, Buttercup, because this is a game that is very much like forcing, if you are immersed in it, like a feeling of stress and anxiety by like the music, like you said, speeding up, just the constant literal looming presence over your head of a very scary, angry moon face. If you just straight up cannot engage with the game because it makes you feel that upset, that's not a problem. But if it's just like, oh, it's just a time thing, I assure you, a person who has having this issue, that is a very surmountable thing that you can work through in the game.
For sure.
You said that you did play the 3DS remake, correct?
Yes, yeah, I played it when it came out. What was it, 2015,
15, yeah.
16? Okay, 2015, yeah.
Yeah. I also got it when it came out because, again, my favorite game of all time on a 3DS where I can take it on the go. Absolutely going to get that. Do you remember anything about it? Do you know what your thoughts are on it?
I really don't. I mean, I definitely remember liking that it was easier having the inventory when the touchscreen and whatnot. I don't like the visuals as much.
I agree.
I think that like part of the eeriness and charm is the way that the 64 game looks. And when you like change those graphics, it just doesn't feel as like scary in the right way. I don't find myself like, especially now that I can play it on the Switch, the 64 version, I don't really find myself yearning to like, I would never go back to, I think, the 3DS version. But I wasn't, I was happy to play that game again because I feel like that came out at a time in which I didn't have access to Majora's Mask for a while and I hadn't played it in ages.
Like for me, I was happy to have it because at that point I was away at college and I didn't have an access to a console except for my 3DS. So being able to play my favorite game while I was a stressed freshman in college, that went a long way. But I do absolutely have my issues with it. I also have a lot of praise for it. And I do think that a lot of people are hyperbolic about the problems. I don't think they're ruinous as some people suggest that they are. But I wanted to just like shout out a few like changes and then, we can sort of parse it out here. You can tell me how you feel about these things. One thing that the game just straight up adds that the previous version didn't have was the addition of 2 fishing holes, one in the swamp and one at the Great Bay. Now, to me, no game is made worse by having a fishing minigame, especially if it's optional. Like, you do not have to engage with the fishing hole, but the fishing hole is there. That is something they added, and I think that's cute.
I did not engage with the fishing hole at all.
That's fine. Did you ever engage with fishing in like Ocarina of Time or anything?
Not really. I never was too in. I feel like I haven't played a fishing minigame where I'm like, yes, this.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe when I think of fishing minigames, I think of, don't you have to in Twilight Princess have to do like fishing as part of the initial round of stuff?
The tutorial of Twilight Princess is like a series worst. I'll say that. Like, I don't think anybody
Yes.
in the world would defend that. If you are playing Twilight Princess, make sure that when you go and replay the game, before you replay the game, have a second save file that already does the tutorial stuff, so you can just skip that tutorial section.
That's a very smart idea because when I think of fishing minigames, I think about that and dreadful.
It's a long time. It's a slog, the tutorial for Twilight Princess, and I'm saying that again as one of the people who likes it more than others.
Yeah, I mean, great game.
Yeah, great game. There's a Majora's Mask book. The author is Gabe Durham. And one section about the 3DS remakes fishing hole that I wanted to read real quick because there was an interview that Aonuma did with Famitsu. He wasn't the director of the 3DS remake. He was just like a credited producer on it. But a fishing activity was added. Aonuma seemed particularly excited about this. Quote, "You can go fishing. I'm not sure if you'll have time to fish in the world of Majora's Mask, but we've added a fishing hole. 2 of them, in fact." The interview asks, "So with the moon slowly falling down on you, you go fishing?" The interviewer laughs. And then Aonuma, very straight-faced, "That's right." I wanted to give the players a feeling of, I know the world is about to end, and I'm going to go fishing. I'm a badass. Aonuma playfully frames the addition of a frivolous minigame as an exercise in futility. Why would you fish if the world is about to end? But on the other hand, why not fish? Why do anything? Like the rest of the game, it's an existential puzzle without a clear answer. That's the author writing that part, Gabe Durham. So yeah, I do think that it does sort of add to like the themes of Majora's Mask we're talking about. Like, what do you do when faced with the apocalypse? You know, what is the existential solution to that? And you know, that's something people just have different feelings about.
Yeah, no, I think you just won me over on the fishing hole with that. Like it even like reminds me of like how great in the final sequence of the game that like when you go into the moon, you're not in like some scary hellscape, but you're in like the most serene location there is in the entire game with like the
Mhm.
tree. And like I think that adds so much that it's like it's Miyazaki has talked about like that the idea of like ma, where it's like the space between things. That's why in Ghibli films there is a lot of like downtime that you see, where it's like not moving the plot forward, but it's someone just like preparing the meal or folding a thing or something, because it's like the space between things defines those big moments. If it's just action nonstop, it's less meaningful than when you have that slowdown. And that's something I really take to heart, and I think that's something that Majora's Mask gets with like that the final before the big epic battle, you just like walk around a tree.
Yeah. I mean, that's the reason why there are so many mini games in even the original game. Like you have like the Honey and Darling stuff, you have shooting galleries, you have like a boat tour you can take that does like actually help you across the swamp, but like it is you can still keep doing the boat tour. The Goron race is a completely optional thing, and yeah, like you can get that to upgrade your sword in the game, but there is just like so many little diversions because like why just make it dungeon? That's like the whole philosophy is like you're helping people, you're building relationships, and like having a fishing hole just sort of adds to that, I guess.
For sure.
Yeah. But like, okay, here's what I'll do. I'll give my bigger thoughts on like Majora's Mask 3D on a Patreon thing. I can summarize it by saying really quickly. Ultimately, I have issues with it, and then there are things about it that I like, but I don't think they're so ruinous that they like ruin the experience. What impact would you say that this game made on you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've touched on little pieces of it throughout this. I've jumped around, but like I think maybe it's in part that like that melancholy and dread could also be like fun. I think that it mashes those things up, that it can talk about it can talk about death, and it can have these heavy themes, but this game never feels heavy. It always feels like fun and jovial, even in its like downness of these like themes. And so I think that's something that I really take with me. I think the empathy is a big thing. This game really is so much about empathizing, seeing all these characters and learning about these other people interacting, which like, I think is big and important when you're like, younger, and learning that stuff and realizing that like in so many games, side characters feel like side characters. No one here feels like a side character. They feel like they're their own main characters, and you are glimpsing into their lives. Like these people don't exist for you. And I think that's a huge takeaway. And I think I try to like, as like a writer, I think all this stuff impacts me, and that I always want my writing and my worlds to feel fleshed out, and that they exist beyond what you're seeing. Like I think that's how you make something feel rich. It's not that you have like lore explaining every little detail or whatnot, but that you hint that there's stuff bigger. Where like I remember on like an episode of Harley that I like wrote, talking about like in a production meeting being like, well, Batman is currently dealing with like A, B, and C. Like he's in this emotional state. And the director was like, is this in the last episode? And I was like, no, this is just like where his head is at in order to understand like this scene and this like character. And like no one's going to know or see any of that. But to me, it was important to make this feel like you are glimpsing this actual feeling world. And I always want that in everything I'm trying to write. I think I like in general, I love writing character-centric stories in these big genre worlds. And Majora's Mask does that better than anything else, I think. That this game is so character-driven despite this big genre world. And that like, that you can have these existential conversations and still be fun and exciting, and that you can make that stuff digestible, which I think like, even in the process of talking about this, I realized that like one of my like scripts in my portfolio, I'm like, oh, that's incredibly inspired by Majora's Mask. And I never even realized that. I was like, oh, I'm literally playing with all these themes that impacted me. So I think there, in ways I probably don't even realize, this game really impacted me story wise, and just overall. I think seeing this like happy mask salesman smile and say like you've met a terrible fate, as he has this big smile on his face, is so memorable, and like that's so much what I want, because it feels so much more complex when it's not just that one thing. It's operating on these multiple levels, and I think that's what I really am drawn to in art.
Right. And I agree with you there. This is a game that has like very much informed, my tastes and things, having played it at a formative age. It's definitely something that has like altered my brain chemistry. I've talked about this before, because I've talked about Outer Wilds, which is very much a game directly influenced by Majora's Mask specifically, and how it handles time loops and things like that. With this specific game, what's so amazing about it, right, is like the way it communicates its themes to you, not just through the storyline and like the atmosphere of it, but just like through the actual interactive aspect of playing the game. This being, you talked about this earlier. This is a game fundamentally about loneliness. Its inciting incident is about loneliness. You're helping characters who cannot do things themselves overcome their problems, and they feel less alone by virtue of the fact that you arrived in their life and selflessly helped them. Like obviously, there's a material reward as you as the player to do that, but like the circumstances that these people are feeling, and like the inciting incident is provoked by loneliness or as a response to some form of loneliness. And the idea that this game is built around masks, face coverings, the Majora mask, like corrupting a person who covers their face, who felt an immense amount of loneliness. And then also you, the player, transforming yourself with masks, or like taking on new forms with masks. Like you're in disguise a lot of this game. People talk to you differently depending on what mask you're wearing. And then like stealth is a bigger component to this game than other earlier Zelda games. So you're, in some points, you're trying not to be seen. There's a whole mask that straight up makes you invisible. Like these are all built into the language of the interactivity. I don't know. I think that there is like, I can't say like I'm constantly consciously thinking about Majora's Mask in my day-to-day life, right? But it is like a game that is very much like about the various forms masks take, which is like either like changing the way in which you communicate with other people, or like coping with the idea, or like somebody like giving language to the idea of like, why do I need to put these masks on to function, or like be able to perform these certain tasks or get through certain conversations? Is this not just a different form of isolation? How do you get over feelings of loneliness? What is the significance of a community where people do not interact with one another? So I do think that like being asked these questions at a young age has made me more empathetic in terms of communication that other people make with me, and also try to make me more conscious of the way that I communicate to others, because I don't want to foster loneliness. I don't want to make somebody feel alone, because I hate the feelings of loneliness and times I was alone in my life. And this was a comfort to get me through a lot of loneliness as a kid, playing a lot of video games and having a game that's directly addressing the feelings of loneliness. That meant a lot to me.
For sure, yeah, it does that so expertly. And like there's an interesting component too of that, like you're helping these people feel less lonely, but in a way every time you help someone feel less lonely, Link becomes lonelier, because he's meeting these people and then they're forgetting about him, and they're forgetting about his adventures with him. So it gives this great heavy sorrow, I think, to like Link. There's like a little bit of that in like Breath of the Wild with him feeling responsible for what happened, but like there's just so much emotion that I think you can put onto Link in this game that isn't as much there in some other games.
Yeah. You think about like Link and where they're starting at the beginning of this game. Like he is lonely. He's looking for an old friend of his. This is all not only brought on by like the conflict of like the loneliness of the villain, but like the loneliness of the hero. It doesn't really make, because Link is not a super dynamic character. So like the takeaway in terms of like all these themes of loneliness are sort of up to your own interpretation. But it does make this Link, the hero of time, Link, a much more interesting and uniquely, I guess, in like a circumstantial way, tragic compared to like some other Links that have been out there. I think a lot of people have glommed onto that because of like Nintendo in one way or another have confirmed that like the person that teaches you sword techniques in Twilight Princess is the Link from the Hero of Time series of games, but Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask. So like there is just like this weird like warrior tragedy to him that makes them so distinct from other Links, even though that they have become more dynamic and expressive as time has gone on?
Yeah, Link has a horrible life.
Yeah.
It's a rough quest to ask of a child.
That's a heavy conversation. I'm glad that we had it though. In terms of the media that we consume, and in your case, the media that you create, what other impact would you say it's made on you? Like, do you have any specific instances or like genres or anything like that?
I mean, I think it definitely impacted like the types of stories I love and the way it's presented. I mean, Majora's Mask does a linear narrative in a way, but because you are getting these glimpses of these other characters' lives and coming in and out, there is like almost a non-linear aspect to it, which I really like. I really love when stories will show you the same event from different perspectives. No, like less when it's like the whole movie's that, but like I love like in Lost, in the second season of Lost, like the first like 4 or 5 episodes, it's like basically getting you to like the same point from like kind of different perspectives. And like I love seeing something like that, and that feels very Majora's Mask-esque to me. That you are experiencing this from these different angles, and you're learning more about it. Or like it's less to me about like these people's perspectives being different and like reality being different, but more of we're just putting together the puzzle piece of this whole situation and this like story. You're getting it in pieces where it's like, you know, you might run into someone and hear like, you know, you might see Cafe walking around, and later on you learn about why he's walking around. And piecing those stories together is something I really enjoy, and I think is really satisfying as an audience member. And so I always like to, I think, put that stuff into my own writing, and I enjoy things that do that as well.
Yeah, like, you know, I definitely appreciate that insight, and it does make sense with like the episodes of like Harley Quinn that you've written, and like how those interactions and like those perspectives are shown in the stories. In terms of, you know, for me, like obviously, like I've talked about it in multiple episodes, like this game made a huge, profound impact on my life, and I'll try to keep it brief here. Like obviously, like I talk about how I just kind of don't care about the Zelda timeline, right? And I think that is kind of like a ripple effect of this game, where it's less about like the legacy of a hero and like this generational battle of good versus evil, where it's just a more personal story of dealing with characters, and Link as more of like an emotional detective solving mysteries of people's sadness versus being a guy who is just, you know, saving the world from existential threats, which I mean he is in this game, and it's a much more physical one than a lot of just like fighting the evil wizard. But this is like a game that's just like, I care about the characters, I care about the impacts these people leave on each other's lives. I want the stories of people in fantasy worlds. Like the lore is interesting, but I don't need to like look at like a compendium of knowledge or like a bestiary to feel a sense of fulfillment engaging with this media, which is why I kind of like things like Twin Peaks or The Green Knight, which deliberately confuse the viewer but still come off satisfying because of like the emotional beats that land throughout those stories.
Yeah, I mean, I always love the feeling of when I watch a show and I'm like, wait a minute, did I miss an episode? And then I go back, I'm like, no, it's correct. Like it wants me to try to piece this together and figure out like, when is this taking place time-wise? I think that's something that this game does and I really like, is trying to piece together when things and narratives take place.
Yeah. So yeah, this is definitely a game that's informed my taste and like what I like out of things. Over the years, it's my favorite Zelda game. I also like, you know, time loop stories are good. That's one thing I do like and I enjoy when they're, you know, executed well. I've talked about it before, but that's not the main thing that I love in media that this game is informed. It's just like I like personal stories. I like consequence-based emotional storytelling. I like people in worlds, not just the worlds that they inhabit. And this game is very, very good at like doing that in such a limited vessel, I guess is the word. We're about to move on to the end here. Before we obviously couldn't cover every single individually great thing about this game. But before we move on, is there anything else that you wanted to mention that you didn't get the chance to mention already?
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about this game all day. There's so many things. Like, I can't believe it. We didn't even talk about like the Giants, which is just one of those designs that like as a kid broke me, where I was just like, what is this? I've never seen anything that like looks like this, and the noises they make. But yeah, it feels impossible to contain it all because there's just so many avenues, and there's side quests that we've gone down on this in this conversation. But I love the giants. I love their design, and I think this introduced me to so much more like surrealism. I'm sure for a lot of kids, this is kind of like your introduction to surrealism in a way,
Yeah.
because this game is filled with those aspects. And now it's like, yeah, of course I love Twin Peaks. Of course I love all these things that do that.
Mhm.
And Majora's Mask is really the start, I think, of that for me.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think just another reason why I'm okay, like, not needing to piece together every bit of lore is like this game just throws so many like weirdly visual ideas at you, and then just like expects you to roll with it and doesn't try and answer them in a text. Like, when you go into the moon, and the moon has just like this idyllic field where there's a single tree in the center, and then there's like 4 or 5 kids running around, and you can see that they all have the same hair as the Happy Mask salesman, and they're all wearing masks over their face. You're like, what is the implication of that? And like the game doesn't offer simple answers to things like that. All of Icana Canyon is just like you going through the ruins of an ancient society that is all ghosts now. And the only living people there is a daughter and a researcher who has been turned into a Gibdo, and you have to heal that man and make him better. I can't believe I just waited until now to mention the Pamela side
Oh
quest in this
yeah.
game. But like Icana Canyon's already dead when you're there. Like there's nothing you can do about it, and there's very little you can learn. So you just have to like make your own sort of story in your head about what this was before. So it's kind of like the commas or the questions that this game imprints on you without giving you a solution to any of them made me appreciate the mystery more than the pursuit of, getting answers, because you can just sort of like infer your own things. And like if somebody tells you later down the line, oh, that's what this means, you can be like, oh, that's cool. But I don't need a book to explain to me like what the answers to all my questions were.
I agree completely. I love mysteries, but like I don't care about answers. Like I love watching shows, but like I never need to know what the answer to something is. Or when people are disappointed by the answer by like a show like Lost or something, I'm like, of course you're disappointed, because no answer is going to be as good as your own imagination. Like the best art activates your imagination, and like I just don't think we need answers that much. Like I find often like in my own scripts when I'm writing, I'll over explain something, and that's the stuff that I'll cut out or will get cut, because it's like you don't need that. It's better without the explanation, and then it feels more depth to it, that you can feel that there might be answers or areas, but it's better without it, and it's more fun. Because like the truth is, like life, you don't get answers, you don't get closure. Endings aren't what actually matters. It's like it's the journey, it's the experience, and I think that's something Majora's Mask gets better than anything. It's a game of endless endings and beginnings.
I agree. And I think to this day, there isn't really any game that quite is like it. There's things that have taken inspiration from it. It obviously has a legacy, but it does still feel like a distinctive piece of media in a franchise that has wildly different entries, and in a medium that has, so many different stories to tell. It still stands out as a unique game. But we'll try and recommend some things to people at the end here anyway, if they do like Majora's Mask. Uh, Jameisen, recommend. You don't have to endorse or advertise anything here because, you are, there's a strike going on right now. But what would you, with that caveat, recommend to listeners based on the game we talk about today without scabbing in any way?
Yeah, I would say, not recommending, but these are things that it reminds me of. And I've mentioned some things. Twin Peaks, of course, is a big one. I think Lost does that with some of the overlapping things. And I think the two, like I don't have any games that I can think of, because like you said, you've mentioned there's definitely the gameplay mechanic or loops, but like even though this game has the gameplay loop, I'm also someone who's not like obsessed with time loop stories or
Yeah.
games, because I think so many of those things are designed for one character. But what I like about this is the tapestry of the world it creates, and that has that rich specific tone. And so I think the thing that it reminds me of is I'll throw out my favorite show of all time, which is The Leftovers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's about like 2% of the world's population just suddenly disappears one day, and it's about like the impact of that, and how do you like continue living life when something so insane could just suddenly happen, which feels a little bit like, what if the moon crashes, and how do you continue from there? How do you live your life once you know the moon can crash?
Yeah.
But also I think it has like that melancholy vibe. I think that like the first season is a lot of people think is very depressing and can be a bit heavy. But I think by season 2 and 3, it figures itself out to be very funny. I mean, I like it from the get-go to begin with,
Right.
but I like dark things. But it gets that absurdity as well, where it's like it can be a very funny, absurd show, but is so emotionally impactful and does create this like tapestry of like of a town. Like particularly in season 2, it goes to it creates like it creates like a new town for itself without saying too much. And it feels like Clocktown to me in the way where it's like there are people who are very clockwork, and you get to learn about all these elements, and you are also seeing like the same event kind of over and over from these other perspectives to piece together what's happening. And so it just really, it does remind me of a lot of stuff that I like in Majora's Mask, and gives me that existential melancholy vibe, but also being very funny and fun, and also has some of that parallel world stuff a little bit, and also plays into the idea of that like there's a central mystery, and the show is like, we're not going to answer this mystery because it's not about the mystery itself, it's about how the mystery impacts you, which is what I'm most fascinated by. Yeah, it's great. Really captures that melancholy vibe.
Yeah. Yeah. Not recommending anything, but like a couple other things that like I haven't mentioned that we like have been drawing comparisons for with Majora's Mask. Minute is a game I played recently. That's just like a game you can beat in like an hour and a half. It's like a 90-minute game, but like the idea of it is like you have 60 seconds to get through a loop, and you try and beat the game within like you try and like make progress in this adventure with every 60 seconds that pass. You find a sword that curses you, and like now you're just like stuck living 60 seconds at a time. And like the only way that you can get to a checkpoint is if like you find another like house with a bed, and then that's your new checkpoint, and then you can make whatever move you need to make in the 60 seconds there. Items you collect carry over, so like oh, now I know how to cut down trees and I can get to this area and I can access this next area, or oh, I can swim now I can get over this body of water and access this thing I couldn't access like 20 loops ago, something like that. But like if you want like the idea of like a loop reduced down to the most like bare bone idea, it's like a cute little indie game where it like breaks down the formula to its barest essentials. Another thing that really I cannot get out of my head as like basically Majora's Mask, and it's a movie, Melancholia, the Lars von Trier film. I'm not the biggest Lars von Trier head. You know, I'm mixed on his filmography overall, but Melancholia is my favorite of his because it is just like a story about like, in the literal sense, the comparison between Majora's Mask. Like a planet is threatening to collide with the Earth, and the existential dread that it gives to the people that we're focusing on in this story. But like they're all just sad in different ways and coping with it in different ways, which reminds me very much of like the will this happen or won't it happen? How is the threat of this making me feel? How is it affecting my personal relationships with the other? And Kirsten Dunst in particular, who was dealing with deep depression throughout the course of this movie, how like the situation especially resonates with somebody who has always felt like death is just around the corner and life is hard to deal with in general. So yeah, that is definitely something that reminds me of Majora's Mask, especially like both in a sense of like giant rock coming towards me,
Sure.
and also the feelings of, oh shit, there's a giant rock coming towards me.
Yeah, I that totally checks out. I think another one that I also think of like it just in the tone and the way that it feels is like Over the Garden Wall, the animated miniseries. I think
that.
like that really captures as well. You know, it has the element that it's like, you know, it's for kids, but also has these adult themes and elements. And there's like this sense of dread and anxiety through Elijah Wood's character, the main character. And I think like the most important thing in all art, really, in like movies or TV and video games as well, I think is tone. And I'm drawn to things that have such a clear and specific tone. And I think Garden Wall has a very compatible tone with Majora's Mask.
I agree. Yeah, I love Over the Garden Wall. I'm glad that you drew that comparison there. All right. That's everything that we have to say about this discussion about Majora's Mask. I asked some listeners of the show how they felt about Majora's Mask, and I want to read some comments that stood out to me. And if you, the listener, have any thoughts about any of the games we discuss, please write into me on Twitter at SelectPodStart and at Danny Vegito on Blue Sky now, or you can just shoot me an email at selectpodstart@gmail.com. Some listener comments that I got regarding this game. Hamish Steele said, I loved it when I eventually played it, but I couldn't at the time because I had two older brothers and it only had 2 save files. So I ended up reading the game in strategy guide form. So to me, the harsh black shadows of the promo art is my main love for this game. I do love all of the official art for this game.
It's the art for this game is so good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it so much. It's very nostalgic for me. Even just like the picture of Link on the holographic cartridge, that's all very good to me.
Yeah, if they were to remake this, put it in that style. make it look more like that.
Mm-hmm. At Toads for Boys on Blue Sky said, I played Majora's Mask in my tweens, just as my parents' lives were collapsing around us. It triggered the first depression I can remember having in a life full of them, when I found myself refusing to play the Song of Time to reset the clock because I lost hope at Cafe's mother being scared for him. The scene in the wooden log in the swamp made me feel a profound sadness when the Skull Kid is shown to be doing all this because of his ruined friendship with the giants, and the scene with him sitting under the tree inside the moon has haunted me all my life. This game made a lost kid feel seen. It's one of those works of art that probably saved someone's life. Mine in this case, simply by connecting with a child who always felt out of touch. Majora's Mask has been my favorite game my whole life, and it will remain my favorite game for the rest of it. Very sweet message. Thanks for writing in.
I think that captures a lot of what's so incredible about this game is that, like, it does make you feel intensely sad, but it's healing. It's like, you know, it's you need to feel sad in order to feel better. You can't just like put on a fake smile like the happy mask salesman, because then you'll just be a horrifying creep like he is. You have to, like, you know, work through and explore those feelings. And I'm always thankful for art like this and those other things I mentioned that have done that for me, and helping me through, my own depression, my own anxiety, my own issues and whatnot. And I think that's as an artist, that's all you hope your art will do, is that it'll help explain yourself and help others through their own issues.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Jameisen, thank you so much for being on the show. It really means a lot that you came on to talk about a game that is clearly both of our favorites. Before you leave, please tell people where they can find you.
So, you know, it's a hellish difficult time to explain yourself on social media with all the collapsing of Twitter, X, and all that stuff. But I'm lucky to have a unique enough spelled name that if you just kind of search Jameisen Borak, you'll find me on whatever various devices, even if I have different names around. It's usually either my name, Jameisen Borak, or something like that you'll find.
Yeah, and I'll make sure I include the link in the description of this episode so people who want to find you and should find you can find you. So, Jameisen, it really means a lot that you were on this episode. Thank you once again for being on the show. And thank you so much for listening to this episode of Select and Start. Once again, I am your host, editor, and promoter, Keifer. If you enjoyed this episode, please give the show a positive review wherever you're listening to this. Engagement helps the show, and your feedback will improve it. And if you want to get more engaged, give the show a follow on Twitter at SelectPodStart. If you have thoughts about Majora's Mask or any other games we discussed, send a DM or leave a comment, and I'll gladly read it on the show. You can also support me on Patreon at patreon.com/KeifersCorner. If you pledge at least $1 a month, you'll get early access to new episodes as well as extended episodes with exclusive content. You can find a link to that and the rest of my projects in the description of this episode. Select and Start is on the Moonshot Network, which is supported by its own Patreon. You can find out more on moonshotpods.com. The art for this show is made by my best friend, Avery Ott. You can follow him on social media with the handle at AveryRobinOtt. That's AVRY, Robin, OTT. And the new theme music for the show is composed by Mike Petrie. You can check out the links in the description for Avery's work and Mike's work. All right, I think that's it. We shall greet the morning together. Fuck, start over.